The moving truck was already waiting outside my lake house when I pulled up that Monday morning. My mother's SUV sat behind it, angled across the gravel shoulder as if she had arrived expecting the gate to open for her. Ashley stood beside the truck, with a diaper bag over one shoulder, and my old blue-tagged emergency key in her hand. Her husband, Evan, was near a stack of boxes in the truck, looking less excited than he had at my wedding 2 nights earlier. Mom marched straight toward my car before I had even shut the door. "Lauren, open the gate. They're charging by the hour." I looked past her at the keypad. Ashley had already tried the old code. I could tell because she kept glancing at it like it had personally betrayed her. "The code doesn't work," she said. "I know," I answered. Mom stared at me. Behind her, the driver folded his arms and waited. What none of them knew yet was that the gate code had stopped working before I went to bed on my wedding night. Looking back from where I am now, almost 4 months later, that locked gate was the first moment my family realized the lake house had never been the real problem. The real problem was that they had spent years treating my silence like permission, and I had finally stopped letting them. Before I tell you how my mother managed to convince part of a wedding reception that I had volunteered my house without ever asking me, I hope you're doing well wherever you're listening from. Stay with me, because what happened after that announcement changed far more than who got through that gate on Monday morning. And if you enjoy family stories where the truth takes a little time to catch up with the people manipulating it, subscribe to the channel and stay with me to the end. The previous Saturday evening, I had been married for less than 3 hours when my mother decided to give away my house. The reception was at a vineyard outside Charlotte, one of those places with long windows, exposed beams, and enough soft spring light to make every photograph look warmer than real life. Nathan and I had chosen it because neither of us wanted an enormous formal wedding. It was beautiful without feeling like we were trying to impress anyone, and until that point, the day had gone almost suspiciously well. My parents had behaved. Ashley had arrived with Evan and their baby without creating a crisis. Mom had made only 2 comments about my seating chart, which, for Diane Whitaker, qualified as restraint. By the time dinner ended, I had relaxed enough to believe we might actually get through the evening without someone turning my wedding into a referendum on the family. I stood with my glass in my hand and thanked everyone for coming. I had barely gotten through the first few lines when Mom appeared beside me and reached for the microphone. She didn't ask. She smiled, touched my elbow as though we had arranged this, and said, "Before Lauren finishes, your sister has some big news." I remember looking at Ashley because her face lit up before Mom said another word. That was the first detail that bothered me. Ashley wasn't surprised. Mom continued, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Ashley, Evan, and the baby are moving into Lauren's lake house on Monday." For half a second, the room went quiet. Then Ashley raised a key over her head, and the table closest to my parents erupted first. Other people joined in, and within seconds the whole thing sounded like a celebration I had somehow forgotten to approve. The applause wasn't what froze me. It was the key. Years earlier, when I bought the house near Lake Norman, I had given my parents one emergency key because they lived in Mooresville and could reach the property much faster than I could from Greensboro. I had attached a small blue enamel tag to it, mostly because I was tired of Dad mixing up unlabeled keys. One corner of the tag had chipped when he dropped it on their driveway. I knew that chip. I had seen it every time Dad opened the kitchen drawer where they kept the key. And there it was in Ashley's hand, held up like she'd just been presented with something that belonged to her. Mom looked at me with the bright, expectant smile she used whenever she had already decided how I was supposed to react. Ashley was smiling too. Evan clapped once, then stopped when he looked at Nathan. I could feel people turning toward me, waiting for the generous older sister to complete the picture. I could have corrected Mom right there. A younger version of me probably would have felt trapped between exploding and pretending everything was fine. At 39, I knew there was a third option. I smiled at Ashley and said, "Is that so?" Then I raised my glass, thanked everyone for celebrating with Nathan and me, and finished my toast. Mom looked relieved. Ashley looked triumphant. Nathan knew me well enough to know that neither expression was warranted. The moment we were alone in a side hallway near the bridal room, Nathan asked, "Did you offer them the house?" There was no accusation in his voice, just a request for a clean fact. "No." He looked back toward the reception doors. "Did you tell your mom they could stay there?" "No." His jaw tightened. Nathan isn't dramatic by nature, which is one of the reasons I married him. He reached for the door handle and said, "Then I'm going back in there." I caught his wrist. "Not yet." He studied me for a second. "Lauren, your sister is holding your key." "Exactly," I said. "The answer about the house is already no. I'm trying to find out how far they got before they bothered to ask me." That distinction mattered. I didn't need to debate whether Ashley was moving into my house. She wasn't. There was no lease, no rent agreement, no conversation, not even a text asking whether she could spend a weekend there. What I needed to know was why she had my emergency key, and why several people at my parents' table had started applauding before half the room seemed to understand what Mom had announced. Nathan noticed the same thing. "Some of them acted like they'd heard this before," he said. That was a better question than anything I had been asking myself. Mom's announcement had felt spontaneous to me, but it clearly hadn't felt spontaneous to everyone. We went back into the reception and behaved like two people who had just gotten married instead of two people beginning an audit. I danced with Nathan. I hugged friends. I ate half a piece of cake and somehow missed the other half disappearing. But while everyone else was moving between tables, I opened the property app on my phone. The lake house had a smart gate system because the driveway was long and relatively isolated. I changed the gate code, removed the old remote access permissions, and saved screenshots showing the time I had done it. Then I messaged the locksmith I had used before and requested the first available appointment Sunday morning. Nathan glanced at my screen and gave me a small nod. "Anything else?" he asked. "Not tonight," I said. "I'm not giving my mother a second wedding." That was another thing I had learned about Mom. Diane was never stronger than when an argument happened in public. In private, facts mattered. In a room full of relatives, facts became personalities. If I had stood up and said Ashley wasn't moving into my house, Mom wouldn't have argued about ownership. She would have looked hurt and asked why I was humiliating my sister when she had a baby. Dad would have told me not to make a scene. Someone would have suggested we discuss it later. By the end of the night, the story would no longer have been that my mother had announced something without my permission. The story would have been that I had embarrassed my family at my own wedding. I had spent enough years inside that machine to recognize it when I heard the gears start turning. So I did something Mom never expected me to do. I started asking people exactly what they had been told. Not what they thought, not what they assumed. The words. Aunt Melissa was the first person I approached because she had been sitting 2 seats from Mom and had applauded immediately. I waited until we were near the dessert table, away from my parents, and asked casually, "When did Mom tell you about Ashley staying at the lake house?" Melissa blinked. "A few weeks ago, I think." My stomach tightened, but I kept my face neutral. "What did she say?" Melissa lowered her voice. "That you were going to let Ashley and Evan stay there for a while, because they needed more room with the baby. I thought it was sweet of you." "Did she say I had already agreed?" Melissa hesitated. That's how she made it sound. Cousin Rachel gave me a different version less than 20 minutes later. According to her, Mom had said Nathan and I wouldn't really be using the lake place after the wedding, and that Ashley could finally have some breathing room. Rachel hadn't heard anything about how long Ashley would stay. She hadn't even realized it was supposed to begin immediately until Mom made the announcement. "I figured you'd all worked it out," she said. "Your mom talked like it was settled." I thanked her and changed the subject before she could start apologizing. I wasn't angry with Rachel. She had no reason to interrogate a family update delivered by my mother at a wedding. But now I had 2 stories, and they weren't the same. One made it sound like I had offered temporary help. The other made it sound like I no longer needed the house. Both had come from Mom. Nathan found me a few minutes later and asked whether I had learned anything. "Enough to know this wasn't invented tonight," I said. I told him what Melissa and Rachel had heard. He asked the question I was already thinking. Did your mom tell Ashley another version? I looked across the room at my sister. Ashley was bouncing her daughter gently against her shoulder, while Mom stood beside her, talking to two cousins as if nothing unusual had happened. The key was no longer in Ashley's raised hand, but I could see the blue tag sticking out of the small purse hanging from the back of her chair. That bothered me more than the applause had. People could misunderstand words. A key required somebody to physically hand it over. I waited until Dad was alone near the bar. Where did Ashley get the lake house key? I asked. His eyes shifted toward Mom before coming back to me. That tiny movement gave me more information than his first answer. Your mother handled all that. Handled what? I asked. The arrangements. Dad, there are no arrangements. His mouth tightened. Lauren, this is your wedding. Don't start this tonight. I kept my voice low. I'm not starting anything. I'm asking why Ashley has the emergency key I gave you. He sighed in the exhausted way he used whenever someone else's bad decision threatened to require effort from him. Your mother was trying to help your sister. That wasn't my question. He looked away again and told me we could talk tomorrow. Dad had spent most of my childhood claiming he hated being put in the middle. What I hadn't understood until much later was that staying silent didn't keep him out of the middle. It just meant Mom got to decide what happened there. I could have pressed him harder that night, but I already had what I needed for the moment. He knew the key had changed hands. He wasn't surprised Ashley had it, and his instinct wasn't to tell me there had been some innocent misunderstanding. His instinct was to protect the evening from the truth. I went back to Nathan and told him the locksmith was confirmed for the next morning. He asked whether I wanted to leave early. I didn't. That was my wedding, and I wasn't surrendering another minute of it because my mother had decided my property was a useful gift she could present to my sister. We stayed, we danced, we talked to friends. When my parents finally left, Mom hugged me and whispered that she was glad I handled Ashley's news so gracefully. I didn't correct her in that moment because there was nothing left to gain from doing it beside the coat check. I only said, "We'll talk tomorrow." She smiled as though tomorrow belonged to her too. Near the end of the reception, Aunt Melissa came back to me looking troubled. She had apparently spent the last hour replaying our conversation. "Lauren," she said, "I hope I didn't make things worse. I really thought you knew about all of this." I told her she hadn't done anything wrong. She frowned and glanced toward the doors my parents had gone through. "It's just strange," she said. "Your mother didn't talk like she was hoping you'd agree." I asked her what she meant. Melissa looked genuinely confused by my confusion. "But your mother said you'd already talked about this weeks ago." That was the moment the problem stopped being my sister showing up with a key. Someone had been having conversations in my name, and I was beginning to realize I might be the only person who hadn't been invited to them. By Sunday morning, Nathan and I had been married for less than 24 hours, and instead of sleeping late or ordering champagne to the room, I was sitting across from him at the hotel breakfast table with my phone, a legal pad, and 4 names written down in a column. Nathan pushed a cup of coffee toward me and looked at the page. Melissa, Rachel, Mom, Dad. Beside each name, I had written exactly what they had told me and, more importantly, who they claimed their information came from. I wasn't trying to prove my mother was lying. I already knew I had never offered Ashley my lake house. What I needed to understand was whether Mom had misunderstood something I said, exaggerated something she thought I meant, or deliberately built an arrangement around a yes that had never existed. Those were 3 very different problems, and I wasn't going to treat them as one. Nathan ate quietly while I added dates beside the conversations Melissa and Rachel remembered. Melissa thought Mom had mentioned the house about 3 weeks before the wedding. Rachel remembered hearing something closer to 2 weeks earlier. Neither could quote Mom perfectly, but both remembered the same general message. Lauren was fine with Ashley using the lake house. What bothered me was how different the reasons sounded. Melissa had been told I wanted to help because Ashley needed more space with the baby. Rachel had been told Nathan and I probably wouldn't use the house much after we married. One version made me generous. The other made the property practically abandoned. Both led to the same conclusion without anyone ever hearing it from me. I drew a line from Melissa to Mom and another from Rachel to Mom. Nathan watched me do it and said, "You do realize you're making a process map at breakfast the morning after our wedding." I told him that was probably the most romantic thing he had learned about me so far. He smiled, but only for a moment. Then he tapped the space beside my mother's name. "What happens when someone says, 'Mom told me you said'?" he asked. I knew what he meant, but I didn't answer immediately. For years, I had heard some version of that sentence and treated it like background noise. Mom said Ashley thought I was upset. Mom said Dad didn't want to discuss something. Mom said Ashley was too overwhelmed for visitors. Mom said I had apparently sounded fine with a change of plans. Most of the time the issue was too small to justify a family argument, so I let it pass. I had always thought refusing to engage was a kind of discipline. Nathan looked at the page and said, "Silence works if everybody leaves the information alone. It doesn't work if somebody keeps editing it after you walk away." That landed harder than I wanted it to, because I couldn't immediately prove he was wrong. I wasn't suddenly ready to reinterpret my entire childhood over scrambled eggs. I still believed most family misunderstandings were exactly that. Misunderstandings. People heard things badly, remembered things selectively, and occasionally assumed too much. But a house wasn't a dinner reservation or a holiday seating arrangement. There had been a key in Ashley's hand. There was a specific moving day. Someone had apparently decided Monday. Logistics didn't happen because of vague family feelings. Somebody had made calls, given instructions, and expected a truck to arrive at property I owned. I closed the legal pad and told Nathan I wanted to see the house before I spoke to anyone else. If there was anything more than talk behind Mom's announcement, I wanted to know before she had time to explain it away. We checked out and drove north toward Lake Norman. The April morning was bright and cool, and under different circumstances I would have enjoyed the drive. Nathan and I had bought coffee for the road. Our wedding clothes were still hanging in garment bags in the back seat, and my wedding bouquet was lying on its side in a cardboard carrier, like proof that we were supposed to be doing something much less complicated. The locksmith met us at the house late that morning. I had already changed the gate code the previous night, but I wanted the exterior locks rekeyed because the original emergency key was still in Ashley's possession. The locksmith didn't need our family history. I told him an authorized spare was no longer under my control, and I wanted the cylinders changed. He nodded, gave me the price, and went to work. While he handled the doors, Nathan and I walked through the house. I checked the mudroom first, then the kitchen, bedrooms, linen closet, garage, and the small office overlooking the lake. Nothing had been disturbed. There were no boxes, no baby supplies, no furniture moved against the walls, and no evidence that Ashley had already begun using the place. I was relieved, but not because I had seriously expected to find her living there. I was relieved because it kept the situation clean. No one had moved in. No one had established some complicated arrangement that would require weeks of arguing over what had been promised. The house was exactly as Nathan and I had left it the last time we stayed there. Whatever Mom had planned for Monday, it had not physically begun. I stood in the kitchen while the locksmith replaced the final lock, and thought about the key Ashley had raised at my wedding. I had given that key to my parents for emergencies, not because I considered the house a shared family resource. There had never been a second authorized copy. Now the original was with Ashley, which meant my parents no longer possessed any valid emergency key at all. Someone had made the choice to move access from the people I trusted with it to someone I had never authorized. That bothered me almost more than Mom's announcement. Words could be twisted. A key had to be removed from a drawer and placed in another person's hand. Nathan came into the kitchen and asked whether I wanted him to call Dad. I said no. Dad had already shown me the night before that he planned to hide behind Mom until I forced him out from behind her. I wasn't ready to do that yet. Once the locksmith finished, I paid him, photographed the new keys for my records, and tested every exterior door myself. Nathan watched me tug the back door twice and said, "Feel better?" I told him I felt informed. that was different. Before we left, I put the new spare in my own bag, rather than giving one to anyone else. It was a small decision, almost boring. But it mattered to me. My parents had been given access because I trusted them to understand the difference between access and ownership. That distinction had apparently become negotiable without my knowledge. Until I understood how, I wasn't handing it back. We stayed at the house for another hour while I made 2 more calls. The first was to my mother's cousin Carol, who had been at the reception but not seated near my parents. I asked whether she had heard anything about Ashley moving before Saturday night. Carol said no. She had applauded because everyone around her was applauding, and because the announcement sounded like something I had already arranged. I thought it was nice, she said. I assumed you two had talked. That answer actually made me feel better. It meant I hadn't somehow missed a secret campaign involving every person in the room. Some guests had simply responded the way people do when someone announces good family news at a wedding. The second call was to my Uncle Brian. His answer was different. He remembered Mom saying, sometime after Ashley's baby was born, that the lake house would be perfect if Ashley ever needed more room. More recently, she had apparently said I wasn't using the place much. Brian didn't remember Mom explicitly saying I had offered it, but he had walked into the wedding believing the idea had already been discussed. That gave me another variation. Temporary help. Unused property. Perfect for the baby. The words changed depending on the person, but they kept pointing toward the same ending. I wrote everything down, including Carol's answer, because I didn't want to exaggerate what I was finding. If half the room had heard nothing before the announcement, then half the room had heard nothing. The truth didn't need improvement. Nathan sat beside me on the deck while I looked over the notes. The lake was calm enough that the boats in the distance looked almost still. "So what do you think?" he asked. I told him I thought Mom had been planting the idea for weeks without ever saying the exact same thing twice. That doesn't necessarily mean she planned all of this from the beginning, I added. Maybe she convinced herself I'd agree. Nathan leaned back in his chair. Then ask her when you agreed. It was obvious, which was exactly why I liked it. No argument about fairness. No debate over whether Ashley needed more space. One question. One fact. I called Mom. She answered quickly and sounded almost cheerful. I was wondering when you'd call. Your father said you were upset about the key. I ignored that opening and asked, when did I tell you Ashley could move into the lake house? There was a pause long enough for me to hear movement on her end of the line. Then she said, Lauren, we talked about the house several times. That's not what I asked. When did I tell you Ashley could move in? Mom sighed. You said you barely use it anymore. I told her that wasn't permission. She immediately shifted. You also said you wanted to be more involved with the baby. I told her that wasn't permission either. Her voice hardened. Why are you doing this? That question almost made me laugh because it was so perfectly backwards. I wasn't doing anything. I was asking when I had agreed to something she had announced publicly. Mom, give me the date. Tell me whether it was a call, a text, an email, dinner at your house, anything. When did I say yes? She didn't answer. Instead, she said Ashley and Evan had outgrown their townhouse, the baby needed space, and I had an entire house sitting near the lake that I used occasionally. She asked whether family meant anything to me now that I was married. I let her finish because every sentence moved further away from the only fact I had requested. When she stopped, I said, You believing I should say yes is not the same as me saying yes. She went quiet. Then she told me I was humiliating Ashley over something that could have been handled privately. That was when I understood how deeply she had reversed the sequence in her own mind. She had announced my property arrangement to a room full of people, but I was humiliating Ashley by asking whether I had agreed. I'm handling it privately right now, I said. I'm talking to you, not the wedding guests. So answer the question. Mom told me she wasn't going to be interrogated by her daughter and ended the call. Nathan had heard only my side, but that was enough. She couldn't name the yes, he said. I told him she hadn't even tried. She had named reasons I should have agreed, which wasn't the same thing. I added Mom's answers to the page. Barely use the house. Want to help with the baby. Family should share. None of those statements were consent. By then, I was no longer trying to determine whether there had been a misunderstanding about one conversation. There had been no conversation to misunderstand. We left the lake house shortly after lunch and started back toward Greensboro. About 40 minutes into the drive, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. A woman introduced herself as a coordinator for a moving company in the Charlotte area and asked whether she was speaking with Lauren Whitaker, owner of a property near Lake Norman. I said yes. She explained that she was confirming access for a scheduled Monday delivery because the person who booked the move was not the listed property owner. My grip tightened around the phone. Nathan glanced at me from the driver's seat. I asked who had made the booking. The coordinator said Diane Whitaker. I asked how she had my number. She explained that the booking listed me as the property owner and included my phone number, while Thomas Whitaker was listed as the person meeting the crew at the gate. Because the booking contact, owner, and access contact were 3 different people, someone in their office had flagged it for confirmation before the crew was dispatched. That was ordinary business to her. To May, it was the first piece of the situation that existed outside my family. I asked her to read the access note exactly. She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Owner aware. Father will meet crew at gate." I looked out the passenger window and watched the highway blur past. The wording was simple. It also made my mother's announcement at the wedding feel much more deliberate. "The owner is aware now," I said, "and the owner does not authorize anyone to move into that property or unload belongings there." The coordinator immediately shifted into a professional tone and told me she would update the order. She wasn't interested in determining who was right in our family. She only needed to know whether the crew could legally be granted access by the property owner. I told her no. I asked whether she could tell me when the move had been booked. She gave me the date. It was before my wedding. Then I asked who had provided the property information. Diane. Who had designated Dad as gate contact? Diane. Had I ever personally confirmed anything with their company? No. The coordinator said they had never spoken with me before that call. I thanked her and asked for a copy of the work order information showing my name as property owner and the updated access status. She said she could send the confirmation to the email address listed for me. I didn't need anything dramatic from her. I just needed the facts preserved. When the call ended, Nathan asked, "Still think she convinced herself you'd agree?" I looked at my notes. Mom had been telling relatives different versions for weeks. She had given Ashley my emergency key. She had booked movers. She had listed Dad as the person who would open my gate. And somewhere along the way, she had written that the owner was aware, despite being unable to identify a single moment when I had said yes. "I think she convinced herself my answer didn't matter," I said. That bothered me more than a straightforward lie would have. A lie at least acknowledges that the truth exists. Mom seemed to be operating on something more comfortable. If she believed an outcome was fair, then my actual decision was just a detail that could be handled later. I thought about the wedding again. The announcement, the applause, Ashley holding the key. Monday already scheduled. If I had objected publicly, Mom could have made the entire room watch me deny my sister something that looked generous. If I stayed quiet, she could treat my silence as confirmation. It was a neat little trap because every reaction, except compliance, could be framed as cruelty. I told Nathan I was done talking to Mom for the day. The next conversation needed to be with Ashley. That sounds obvious now, but our family had spent years making obvious communication feel strangely unnecessary. If Mom said Ashley needed space, I accepted it. If Mom told Ashley I was busy, Ashley apparently accepted that too. We were grown women who owned phones and lived less than 2 hours apart, yet somehow our mother had remained the clearinghouse for information neither of us had asked her to manage. I opened a video call with Ashley before I could talk myself into waiting. She answered after several rings. Evan was behind her in their living room, surrounded by taped boxes. Their daughter was in a portable playpen near the couch. Seeing the boxes made Monday stop feeling theoretical. Ashley smiled cautiously and said, "Hey, I didn't mention Mom. I didn't mention the movers. I asked one question. When did I tell you that you could move into my house?" Her expression changed immediately. Ashley looked toward Evan before answering me. "Mom said she cleared it with you." I asked, "Did I ever clear it with you?" She frowned. "Why would I call you after Mom already handled it?" I kept my voice level. "Because it's my house." Evan had stopped pretending not to listen. He came closer to the phone and asked Ashley, "Wait. Your mom said Lauren agreed, right?" Ashley looked irritated now, but some of that irritation seemed aimed at the room rather than at me. "Yes, that's what I've been telling you." I asked whether she had a text from me, an email from me, or even a voicemail where I told her she could move in Monday. Ashley said she didn't save conversations like a lawyer. I told her I wasn't asking her to. I was asking whether the conversation had ever happened. "Mom talked to you," she said. "She told me you were fine with it." I could hear the certainty in her voice, but it wasn't the certainty of someone remembering my words. It was the certainty of someone repeating somebody else's. Evan sat down beside her. "Ashley, did Lauren ever tell you this herself?" he asked. My sister opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since Mom had taken the microphone at my wedding, Ashley wasn't looking angry, pleased, or defensive. She looked uncertain. And as I watched her try to answer her husband, I realized she might have packed an entire house without ever once hearing the word yes from the woman who owned it. When I pulled up to the lake house Monday morning, the moving truck was already waiting outside the gate, exactly where this story began. Nathan and I had arrived a little after 7, so I could make sure the new locks worked, check the gate one more time, and deal with whatever happened without sacrificing the rest of my day. I had moved one work review from 9 to noon and told my team I would join remotely. That was the total disruption I was willing to allow. I had just gotten married. I had a job I liked, a husband I wanted to enjoy being married to, and a life that existed outside whatever crisis my mother had manufactured. I wasn't canceling any of it to stand guard over my own property. Mom's SUV arrived first. Dad was with her. Ashley and Evan came about 15 minutes later in their townhouse, packed with things they clearly expected to unpack somewhere else, and the moving truck pulled in behind them soon after. There were boxes visible through the open rear of the truck, along with a crib mattress, 2 lamps, a folded high chair, and enough furniture to make it obvious this wasn't a weekend stay. Ashley got out holding the diaper bag while Evan carried their daughter in her car seat. Mom barely acknowledged Nathan before marching toward the keypad and punching in the old gate code. The red light flashed. She tried again more slowly, as if the machine might recognize confidence. "The code doesn't work," Ashley said. She had the blue-tagged key in her hand. But of course a key didn't matter if she couldn't get through the gate. Mom turned toward me before I had even closed my car door. "Lauren, open it. They're charging by the hour." Her tone implied that I had created an unexpected inconvenience, not stopped an unauthorized move. I looked at the driver. He was standing beside the truck with a clipboard, waiting for instructions. He caught my eye and gave me a small nod that told me the coordinator had updated the order exactly as promised. "I spoke with your office yesterday," I told him. "Yes, ma'am. We have the owner note." He glanced at Mom, then back at me. "We're not unloading without your authorization." Mom's face changed. It was subtle at first, just a tightening around her mouth. "She's authorizing it now." She pointed at me as though the driver needed help identifying the person who owned the property. "Lauren, tell him to open the gate." "No." Ashley stared at me. Mom let out a sharp breath and looked around as if someone else might correct me. "You cannot seriously be doing this with a baby standing here." The baby was not standing anywhere. She was 8 months old and asleep in her car seat while Evan held her. I looked at him instead of taking Mom's bait. "Evan, are you and Ashley still in your townhouse?" He looked confused by the question. "Yes." "Did your lease end?" "No." "Do you still have the keys?" "Yes." "Utilities still on?" He shifted the car seat to his other hand. "Of course." I nodded. "Then no one is putting a baby out." Mom folded her arms. That's not the point. It is exactly the point if you're going to describe this as homelessness. Ashley looked at me with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. We packed everything because we were told this was settled. I know. Then what are we supposed to do with all this? Redirect the truck back to your townhouse or to storage. That's between you and the moving company. Mom stepped closer. Listen to yourself. Your sister has an infant. They spent all weekend packing. They hired movers. They arranged their whole week around this. Who hired the movers? Nobody answered immediately. I already knew the answer, but I wanted Mom to say it with everyone standing there. The work order was in my email. Diane Whitaker was the booking contact. Thomas Whitaker was listed as the gate contact. Lauren Whitaker was listed as the property owner, followed by a note that said the owner was aware. That phrase had bothered me since Sunday because it was carefully weaker than owner approved. Whoever wrote it didn't have to claim I had signed anything. They only had to make it sound as if everyone had been informed. I pulled the work order up on my phone. Mom, why does this say owner aware? She looked irritated rather than surprised. Because you were aware. The movers were booked before the wedding. You knew we had been talking about Ashley needing more space. That isn't what I asked. Dad rubbed the back of his neck. He had been unusually quiet since arriving. Every few seconds his eyes went toward the gate, the truck, the road, anywhere except me. I noticed it, but I wasn't ready to decide what it meant. At that point, I knew he had been willing to let Mom give Ashley my emergency key. I knew he had been listed as the person who would meet the truck. I did not yet know what Mom had told him or how much he had chosen not to ask. Mom gestured toward the lake house beyond the gate. Lauren, you told me you weren't using the place much. You said you wanted to be more involved with the baby. You said you understood how crowded they were. I said all kinds of things. None of them were permission to move into my house. You knew this was coming. No, I knew you wanted it to happen. That's semantics. No, that's ownership. Nathan remained beside me without interrupting. I appreciated him for that more than I could say. He wasn't there to perform outrage on my behalf or turn my family into opponents in some newlywed loyalty contest. He was there because we had agreed on the facts. The house was mine. I had never authorized the move. Ashley still had a home. Everything after that was noise. The driver cleared his throat gently. If we're not unloading here, I need a new destination or we'll have to return the load. Evan looked at Ashley. We can take it back. Mom turned on him. You cannot put all of that back in that townhouse. We got it out of the townhouse, he said. We can put it back. Ashley shot him a look. That's not the point. I almost smiled because Mom had said the same thing less than 2 minutes earlier. I didn't. Nothing about the morning was funny yet. Where did you think you were going to live permanently? I asked Ashley. She stared at me. Here. For how long? Mom said we'd figure that out. Did Mom say 6 months? She said you weren't in a rush. Did I say 6 months? Ashley looked away. Did I say 3 months? No answer. Did I say 1 month? Lauren, stop. I'm asking because yesterday, different people gave me different versions. Some thought you were staying temporarily. Some thought Nathan and I were basically done using the house. You seemed to think there was no end date at all. So, which arrangement did I supposedly agree to? Ashley tightened her grip on the diaper bag. Mom said you understood. There it was again. Mom said. Evan looked from Ashley to me. Yesterday, you asked whether Lauren ever told you directly. You didn't answer me. Ashley turned toward him. I told you. Mom handled it. That's not an answer. Mom stepped between them verbally before Ashley could respond. Evan, don't let Lauren turn this into something it isn't. We've been discussing this as a family for weeks. I looked at her. I haven't. You are part of the family. Then why wasn't I in the discussion about my house? Dad finally spoke. Can we not do this beside the road? I looked at him. You were supposed to meet the movers at the gate. His face stiffened. That's on the work order, I continued. So, Apparently doing this beside the road was fine until I showed up. He didn't answer. Mom did. Your father was helping. Helping whom? Ashley. With what I own? Mom's expression sharpened. Do you hear how cold you sound? That was the move I had expected. It had taken longer than usual, probably because no audience was available except the movers, and they clearly wanted nothing to do with us. When facts stopped working in Mom's favor, the conversation moved to character. I wasn't generous enough. I wasn't warm enough. I wasn't family enough. The subject became who I was instead of what she had done. I sound specific, I said. That's making you uncomfortable because specific questions need specific answers. Ashley let out an exhausted laugh. You always do this. Do what? Turn everything into some corporate meeting where everybody has to produce documentation. I looked at her. You brought a moving truck to my property. Documentation became relevant. Evan lowered the baby's car seat onto a patch of grass in the shade and straightened. Ashley, I need you to answer something. She sighed. What? Did Lauren ever tell you we could move here? I already told you what Mom said. I'm not asking about your mom. Ashley went still. For a moment, nobody spoke. Even Mom seemed to understand that answering for Ashley would prove more than anything I could say. Evan waited. I watched my sister's face, and something in it shifted from defiance to calculation. She wasn't trying to remember a conversation. She was deciding how honest she could afford to be. Finally, she said, Not directly. Evan stared at her. Not directly? Mom said she cleared it. You told me Lauren offered. Because that's what Mom told me. Those are not the same sentence. Ashley looked at me then, and the anger returned because anger was easier than whatever else she was feeling. You could have told me sooner. I blinked. Sooner than what? That you had a problem with this. I found out Saturday night. You knew Mom was talking to people. I learned that Saturday night, too. She told me she'd spoken to you, and you never checked. Ashley opened her mouth, but I raised a hand before she could launch into another explanation. Actually, there's something I want to understand. If you really thought I offered you my house, why didn't you ever thank me? That silenced her more effectively than anything else had. I hadn't planned the question. It came out because I suddenly realized how strange her behavior would have been if she truly believed the story she was telling. Ashley thanked people for birthday gifts. She sent photos when someone bought something for the baby. If she thought I had offered her and her husband an entire furnished lake house, even temporarily, there should have been one message. Thank you. Are you sure? This means so much. Anything? Evan looked at her slowly. That's a fair question. Ashley adjusted the diaper bag even though it didn't need adjusting. I was going to. When? Before the wedding. What stopped you? She glanced at Mom. Mom said, I told her you had enough going on. I looked back at Ashley. Mom told you not to thank me? She said wedding week wasn't the time to get into logistics. Thank you isn't logistics. Ashley exhaled hard. Fine. I didn't want to make it complicated. I waited. She looked at Evan, then down at the gravel. I thought if I called you, you might start asking questions. What questions? How long? Why we needed it? Whether we could afford something else. Could you? Her eyes flashed. That's not the point. Apparently it's everybody's favorite sentence today. Nathan coughed into his hand, and I knew he was hiding a reaction. Ashley didn't notice. Evan did. He wasn't amused. So you knew there was a chance Lauren would say no. Ashley looked cornered now, and for the first time I felt something other than anger toward her. Not sympathy exactly. Recognition. Ashley had spent years accepting Mom's version of me when it was convenient. And now that habit had brought a truck full of her belongings to a locked gate. She hadn't invented the arrangement, but she had avoided the one conversation that could have exposed it because she liked the answer she already had. I knew Lauren could be difficult about the house, she said. I felt my jaw tighten. Meaning? You like things controlled. You always have. It's my property. I know. Then what exactly would I have been difficult about? She looked away again. I didn't want to hear no after Mom said it was already handled. There it was. Not innocence. Not conspiracy. Something messier and more believable. Ashley hadn't known for certain that I had agreed. She had known there was a question she didn't want to ask. Evan stared at her for several seconds. You packed our home knowing she might say no? I thought Mom knew what she was talking about. That's not what you just said. Ashley looked close to tears, but she wasn't crying. I believed it would work out. I nodded. So did Mom. Mom turned toward me. This is cruel. No. Cruel would have been letting them move in and pretending this was fine until I couldn't take it anymore. I'm saying no before a single box crosses the gate. You have 3 bedrooms sitting empty. Sometimes, you and Nathan have your own place. So do Ashley and Evan. Lauren, no. You don't get to count my rooms and decide which ones I'm using enough to keep. The words came out more sharply than anything I had said that morning, but I didn't regret them. That was the heart of it. Mom's entire argument depended on treating my unused capacity as communal property. An empty bedroom became something Ashley lacked. A free weekend became time I owed. Financial stability became proof that taking from me caused less harm. She called it fairness because she never counted what I wanted as part of the equation. The foreman approached us again. I need to move the truck. Evan nodded immediately. Take it back to our townhouse. Ashley looked at him. Evan, we have nowhere else authorized to put it. Mom said, I can pay for storage. Evan shook his head. That's not necessary. It won't fit back the same way. We'll make it fit. There was something in his tone that stopped Mom from arguing. The foreman asked Evan for the address, wrote it down, then walked back toward the truck. Within a few minutes, the engine started. I stood there watching thousands of pounds of furniture that had been expected to cross my gate turn around without a single call to the police, without a lawyer, without me screaming at anyone. The plan failed because I had said no. Before it could become a fact, everyone expected me to accept. Once the truck was gone, the morning became quieter and somehow more uncomfortable. The strangers had left. What remained was just family, and the question nobody could answer. Ashley looked at the blue-tagged key in her hand. She turned it over once, rubbing her thumb across the chipped corner. Then she slid it off her key ring and walked toward me. For a second, I remembered giving that key to Dad years earlier, standing in my parents' kitchen while he teased me for labeling everything. Back then, it had meant trust. By Saturday night, it had become proof that trust had been reassigned without my permission. Ashley held it out. I took it. Thank you, I said. She flinched slightly, maybe because she expected more. I didn't give her more. Returning something that belonged to me wasn't an apology, and it wasn't reconciliation. It was simply the first correct action she had taken since this began. Mom watched the exchange with open disgust. So that's it? You're happy now? No. What else do you want? The truth would be useful. I've told you the truth. Ashley turned toward her. Then show me. Mom frowned. Show you what? The message. What message? The one where Lauren said yes. Mom's face changed just enough for me to notice. Ashley noticed too. You said you talked to her, Ashley continued. You told me she was fine with Monday. You told me the house wasn't being used. You told me not to bother her during the wedding because you had already handled it. Mom's voice became softer, the way it always did when she wanted to sound reasonable while everyone else sounded emotional. Ashley, family conversations don't always happen in one neat text message. Then show me anything. I don't save every casual conversation. You text constantly. That isn't the point. Ashley stared at her. Dad said her name quietly. Ash, maybe everybody needs to cool down. She ignored him. Did Lauren ever actually say yes? Mom looked at me rather than at Ashley. Lauren made it clear she wasn't using the house much. Ashley shook her head. That's not what I asked. For the first time all morning, I heard my own words coming out of my sister's mouth. Mom tried another direction. Your sister knows how hard this year has been for you. She knows what having more room would mean. She told me she wanted to be more involved with the baby. I put those things together because I thought, for once, Everyone could do something that helped the family instead of measuring every inch of what belongs to whom. Ashley didn't move. Did she say yes? Mom's jaw tightened. Then she looked at Nathan. Things changed after she met him. I felt Nathan stiffen beside me, but he still didn't speak. Ashley frowned. What does Nathan have to do with whether Lauren said yes? She used to understand family differently. I almost admired the maneuver. Mom couldn't produce consent, so she was preparing a replacement story. I had changed. Nathan had influenced me. Marriage had made me selfish. If that version worked, the missing yes no longer mattered because my refusal could be blamed on a new husband rather than on the fact that I had never agreed in the first place. I wasn't going to help her build it. Nathan had nothing to do with my answer, I said. I didn't say yes before I married him. I didn't say yes after I married him. There is no version of this where he changed my mind, because there was never a yes to change. Mom looked furious. Dad looked tired. Evan looked like he had just realized the family he married into operated under rules nobody had bothered to explain. Ashley looked different. Not convinced. Not suddenly on my side, but shaken enough that the certainty she'd brought to my wedding was gone. She pulled out her phone. Mom immediately asked, "What are you doing?" Ashley unlocked the screen and looked up at her. "I'm looking." "For what?" "For whatever you told me," Lauren said. Mom stepped closer. "This is ridiculous. You're letting her turn us against each other." Ashley stopped scrolling. I watched her face at that sentence because I had heard versions of it my entire life. Any attempt to compare information became an attack on family harmony. Any direct question became disloyalty. The safest arrangement for Mom was always the one where nobody checked what anyone else had actually said. Ashley looked at me, then back at Mom. Her voice was quieter when she spoke again. "Then this should be easy." Mom said nothing. Ashley held up her phone. "Show me where Lauren said yes." Ashley did not send me anything Monday night. She did not call Tuesday either. I knew better than to chase her. If I pushed while she was still embarrassed about the moving truck, she could make the entire conversation about how I had made her feel at the gate instead of what Mom had told her before she ever got there. So I went back to work. Nathan went back to his projects, and the lake house stayed exactly where it had always been, locked, empty, and mine. The original blue-tagged key sat in the small wooden tray beside my desk at home. Every time I looked at the chipped corner, I remembered Ashley holding it above her head at my wedding like proof of an agreement I had never made. I had spent years believing our family's problems came from people being too emotional. That week, I started wondering how many had come from people being too comfortable with words that were never checked. Ashley finally contacted me Thursday afternoon. She did not begin with an apology. She sent 6 screenshots without explanation, then followed them with a message telling me to read them in order. I was at my desk in Greensboro between meetings, so I closed my office door and enlarged each image on my computer. The screenshots came from her conversation with Mom during the 3 weeks before the wedding. At first, there was nothing dramatic in them. Mom asked how the baby was sleeping, whether Evan was still working late, whether the townhouse felt crowded, and whether Ashley had looked at larger rentals. It read like ordinary concern from a mother who had spent the better part of a year reminding everyone that her younger daughter had a baby. Then the lake house began appearing. Mom wrote that I probably would not be using it much after the wedding. A few days later, she told Ashley that I understood how badly they needed more room. After that came a message, saying I thought being near the lake would be good for the baby. None of those lines were presented as direct quotes from me, but each one sounded slightly more certain than the last. Near the end of the thread, Mom wrote, "Lauren is fine with Monday. Your dad can meet the movers." That was the first sentence I read twice. Not might be fine, not probably fine, fine with Monday. By then, the possibility had become a schedule. I called Ashley instead of texting. Evan answered with her because they had apparently agreed not to keep having separate versions of the same conversation. Ashley looked tired, and the background behind her showed half the boxes from Monday still stacked against the townhouse wall. She said, "I thought you should see what she told me." I asked whether those were all the messages about the house. She said they were the ones she could find quickly, then added that Mom had also spoken to her by phone. I told her the texts were enough for the moment. What mattered wasn't whether Mom had used the exact same words in every conversation. What mattered was that Ashley had been shown a progression from possibility to certainty without ever being shown where I entered the progression. Ashley crossed her arms. She could have been summarizing what you told her. Her voice was defensive, but not nearly as certain as it had been Monday morning. I told her that was possible, which surprised her. I wasn't interested in winning by refusing every innocent explanation. If Mom had genuinely misunderstood one conversation, I wanted to know that. If she had taken something vague and stretched it too far, I wanted to know that too. The problem was that I remembered the conversations Mom had had with me before the wedding, and none of them involved Ashley moving into my house. I searched my own message thread with Mom while Ashley and Evan stayed on the call. It took less than 5 minutes because I remembered one exchange in particular. A few weeks before the wedding, Mom had asked whether Nathan and I planned to use the lake house much right after we married. At the time, I had assumed she was asking because my parents sometimes went out there when we weren't using it, usually to check the property after storms or bring in packages. I found the message and read it silently first. Then I turned my phone toward the camera, even though the text was too small for them to see clearly. "I'm sending you this," I told Ashley. "Read the whole thing." The conversation was simple. Mom had asked, "Are you two planning to be at the lake much right after the wedding?" I had answered, "Probably not for the next few weeks. Nathan and I aren't planning to host anyone there until I finish the spring maintenance list." There was nothing about Ashley, nothing about the baby, nothing about anyone moving. I had actually said we were not planning to host anyone because I needed to have the deck railing checked, schedule the annual air conditioning service, and deal with a small leak near one of the upstairs windows before summer storms made it worse. It was the kind of unremarkable homeowner conversation I would not have remembered at all if Mom hadn't built something much larger on top of it. Ashley stared at the screenshot after I sent it. "Wait." She looked down at her phone, swiped backward through her conversation with Mom, then stopped. She sent me part of this. I felt something settle in my stomach. Ashley turned her phone toward Evan first. He leaned closer and read it. Then she sent the image to me. Mom had forwarded exactly one line from my answer. "Probably not for the next few weeks." Everything after that was gone. The sentence saying Nathan and I were not planning to host anyone had been omitted. Under the cropped line, Mom had written to Ashley, "See? She knows you need some breathing room, don't worry so much." I compared the two screenshots side by side on my computer. Same date, same wording, same first sentence. One version ended where the meaning became useful to Mom. For a while, nobody spoke. I could hear the baby making soft noises somewhere off camera. Ashley finally said, "I thought she was just summarizing." Evan looked at her. "She didn't summarize. She removed the part that contradicted what she was telling you." Ashley rubbed her forehead. "I didn't know there was another sentence." I told her I believed that. She looked relieved for half a second, until I added, "But you also never asked." Her expression hardened again. "I already admitted that. I'm not trying to make you admit it again. I'm separating what Mom did from what you did." "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means Mom gave you incomplete information. That's on her. You accepted it because you wanted the answer. That's on you." Evan looked down, which told me he agreed, but wasn't interested in piling on. Ashley did not appreciate the distinction. She said she had trusted our mother, which was true. She said Mom had been helping her with the baby for months, which was also true. She said she had no reason to assume Mom would invent something this big. That was where I disagreed. Ashley had already told us Monday that she avoided contacting me because she was afraid I might start asking questions. That meant some part of her knew Mom's certainty had outrun mine. "I wasn't sitting around hoping to steal your house," she said. "You make it sound like I was waiting for Mom to hand me something. I don't think you were planning a theft." "Then stop talking like I was. I'm talking like you packed your furniture before speaking to me." Her face flushed. "Because I thought it was handled. By someone who didn't own the house." Ashley looked ready to hang up. Evan spoke before she could. She's not wrong about that. Ashley turned on him. Whose side are you on? He immediately shook his head. That is exactly what I'm not doing. There shouldn't be sides in a question about whether somebody said yes. That sentence changed the temperature of the call. Ashley looked away from both of us. I understood why she was angry. If Mom had lied cleanly, Ashley could put all the blame in one place. If I had been cruel without warning, she could put it on me. Instead, she was stuck with a more uncomfortable truth. Mom had manipulated the information, and Ashley had helped the manipulation work by not asking the one person whose answer mattered. I did not need her to confess to being a villain. I needed her to stop pretending convenience was the same thing as innocence. I asked her to scroll farther back and tell me when Mom first mentioned the lake house specifically as a place they could stay. She found a message from early April. Mom had written, "Lauren isn't going to need that place much once she's married. You should stop worrying about space." The wording made my stomach turn for a different reason. It wasn't just inaccurate. It revealed a logic I had seen before without ever naming. My marriage had apparently changed the status of property I bought 6 years earlier. I already had a home in Greensboro before Nathan and I married. The lake house had never been my primary residence. Yet somehow marriage had become evidence that I required it even less than before. Ashley said, "I didn't take that literally." I asked what she had taken it to mean. She paused and admitted she thought Mom was saying I would be spending more time with Nathan and therefore would not care as much who used the house. I told her that interpretation was exactly the problem. My life improving had repeatedly been treated as proof that I could absorb more inconvenience. I had a stable job, so I could handle an unexpected expense. I didn't have children, so my schedule was considered flexible. I had the lake house, so an unused bedroom looked like surplus. Every advantage in my life became evidence that taking something from me mattered less. Ashley bristled. "You think I asked to be treated like I couldn't handle anything?" That stopped me. No, because that's what it sounds like. I leaned back in my chair. The question opened a door I had not expected to reach that afternoon. I had spent years seeing Ashley as the person who benefited from Mom's favoritism, which she did, but benefit and dignity weren't the same thing. If Mom constantly treated Ashley as the one who needed rescuing, Ashley had been assigned a role too. Hers came with more help and fewer consequences, but it also came with the expectation that she would remain close, dependent, and grateful. "I don't think you asked for the role," I said. "I think you learned how to use it." Ashley looked at me sharply. "And I learned how to avoid fighting about it," I continued. Neither of those things made Mom's version of events more accurate. Evan exhaled slowly. "That's probably the first useful thing anybody has said this week." Ashley gave him a look that would have ended a less stable marriage, then returned to the screenshots. She still wanted to believe Mom had been careless rather than deliberate. I understood that impulse. "Maybe she cut the message because the rest didn't seem relevant," she said. I asked why the sentence saying I wasn't hosting anyone would be irrelevant in a conversation about Ashley moving in. She did not answer. Maybe she thought maintenance didn't apply to us. I reminded her the line was not just about maintenance. It explicitly said we were not hosting anyone. She said Mom probably thought family didn't count as guests. I asked whether that meant family also didn't need permission. Evan covered his mouth with his hand. Ashley glared at him. "Don't." "I'm not laughing." "You are absolutely laughing." "I'm trying not to because this is horrible, but Lauren has a point." I almost smiled myself, but the underlying issue was too clear now. Every explanation Ashley offered required changing the meaning of my words after I had said them. Family doesn't count. Lauren doesn't really use the house. She understands. She wants to help. Each step looked harmless alone. Together, they turned a sentence about spring maintenance into permission for 3 people to move into my property. After the call ended, I printed both screenshots and placed them beside each other on my desk at home. Nathan came in carrying takeout and found me staring at them. The blue-tagged key was still in the tray beside my keyboard. I showed him the full message first, then the version Mom had forwarded to Ashley. He read them without speaking. Finally, he said, "She didn't add a lie to your sentence." I knew immediately what he meant. Mom had done something harder to challenge. She had used my exact words. She had simply stopped quoting before the words became inconvenient. That distinction mattered because it explained why so many of Mom's stories sounded believable. She rarely invented something from nothing. She used a real conversation as scaffolding. I said I probably wouldn't use the house for a few weeks. True. Ashley needed more room. True. I wanted a relationship with my niece. True. Nathan and I had another home. True. Each fact could survive scrutiny. The lie appeared in the spaces between them. Nathan unpacked dinner while I told him about the rest of the call. When I mentioned Mom's message saying I would not need the lake house much once I was married, he shook his head. "Don't let her make me the explanation," he said. "For what? Are you saying no? If this becomes, Nathan doesn't want Ashley there, then nobody has to deal with the fact that you never agreed." I knew he was right. Mom had already tried that at the gate, by saying I had changed after meeting him. If I defended Nathan too aggressively, we would still be accepting her frame. The question wasn't whether my husband supported my family. The question was whether my mother had authority over my house. That evening I called Mom. I did it from home with Nathan in the next room. Not because I needed a witness, but because I didn't want to have the conversation in the middle of work. She answered on the third ring. Her first sentence was, "I assume Ashley sent you everything." There was no confusion in her voice, no question about what I meant. She knew exactly why I was calling. "She sent me what you forwarded from my message." Mom sighed. "Lauren, please don't turn this into some forensic investigation. You left out half my answer. I kept it simple. The part you removed said Nathan and I weren't planning to host anyone. I knew what you meant." I looked at the printed screenshot on my desk. "Then tell me what I meant." "You meant you weren't entertaining guests because you had work to do on the house." "Correct. Ashley isn't a guest." There it was, clean and effortless. Mom had not misunderstood the sentence. She had created an exception inside it without asking me. Was Ashley an owner? Don't be ridiculous. Was she a tenant? You know she wasn't. Then what gave you the authority to decide my sentence didn't apply to her? Mom's voice sharpened. Do you hear yourself? Tenant, owner, authority. This is your sister we're talking about, not a stranger off the street. And this is my house, not a family committee. Your sister needed help. Then you could have asked me. I knew you'd make it complicated. I stopped. Mom stopped too. The silence lasted just long enough for both of us to hear what she had said. Complicated how? I asked. She recovered quickly. You always need every detail. How long, who pays for what happens next. Ashley had a baby. She was overwhelmed. She didn't need an interview. Those are normal questions before someone moves into a house. Not in a normal family. I almost asked what she thought a normal family was, but I knew where that path went. We would spend 20 minutes arguing about values until the evidence disappeared beneath feelings. I returned to the screenshot. You cropped my message. I forwarded the relevant part. You decided the part saying no guests was irrelevant. Because I understood your intention. You understood what you wanted my intention to be. Mom was quiet again. When she spoke, her voice softened. Lauren, I have known you for 39 years. I know when you're saying something because you're stressed and when you're saying what you really mean. There it was, the belief underneath everything. Mom did not experience my words as final information. They were raw material. She believed she knew the deeper version of me well enough to correct what I actually said. If I objected, I was stressed. If I said no, I was being overly practical. If I stepped away, she could explain what I really meant after I left. You don't get to improve my answers, I said. I'm not improving anything. You removed the sentence that stopped your plan. It wasn't a plan. You booked movers. Because somebody had to help Ashley organize. You gave her my key. She needed access. You announced it at my wedding. Because I thought it would be nice for the family to celebrate something good. Each answer justified the action without addressing permission. I realized she could probably continue like that for hours. Mom had always been excellent at making motives sound like authority. If she meant well, the method became secondary. If Ashley benefited, my consent became a technicality. I told her I had saved the full conversation and Ashley's screenshot. Mom immediately became offended. Saved them for what? Are you building a case against your own mother now? I said I was keeping them because people were already being told different versions of what happened. She accused me of making the situation uglier than it needed to be. I reminded her that a moving truck had come to my gate. She said that only happened because I had changed everything at the last minute. I changed nothing. You changed the locks. Because you gave away my key. To your sister. Without asking. You see betrayal in everything now. No, Mom. I'm finally checking. That was the first time she sounded genuinely angry rather than frustrated. Checking what? What people were actually told? Her breath caught slightly before she answered. Be careful, Lauren. Families fall apart when everybody starts keeping score. I looked at the 2 screenshots again. Families also fall apart when one person keeps translating everybody. She hung up. I did not call her back. A year earlier, I probably would have. I would have wanted to smooth the edges, clarify that I wasn't accusing her of ruining the family, make sure she knew I still loved her. That reflex had always felt like maturity. That night I understood it differently. If I rushed to make Mom comfortable every time a fact made her uncomfortable, the conversation would always end before the fact mattered. The first message from a relative came the next morning. Cousin Rachel asked whether everything was all right because Mom had apparently told her I was under a lot of pressure adjusting to marriage and had become unusually territorial about the lake house. I read the sentence twice and felt almost impressed by the speed of it. Less than 12 hours after I showed Mom the cropped message, the reason for my refusal had already changed. It was no longer that I had never consented. Now I was overwhelmed, newly married, and acting differently. I answered Rachel with 3 lines. I told her Nathan had nothing to do with the decision. I had never agreed to anyone moving into the house. The movers had been booked before Mom announced the plan to me. Rachel replied that she hadn't known that and thanked me for explaining. That was all. No family manifesto, no screenshots blasted into a group chat. No attempt to recruit her to my side. Aunt Melissa contacted me later with a similar question. Mom had told her Nathan and I wanted more privacy after getting married, which was supposedly why I had backed out. Again, I gave the direct facts and stopped. Nathan was right. If we spent the next month arguing that he was a good husband who supported my family, Mom would succeed in changing the subject. I was not going to defend myself against a story that existed only because the original facts were bad for her. By Friday, Ashley had heard the new version too. She called me after dinner and sounded angrier than she had when I turned away the movers. Mom told Aunt Melissa, "You changed your mind because Nathan doesn't like having family use the lake house." I told her Melissa had already asked me about it. Ashley swore under her breath. Evan heard her tell Dad on the phone that this whole thing wouldn't have happened before you got married. I asked how Evan knew. She said Mom had called while he was in the kitchen and had been on speaker for part of it. I reminded Ashley that I could only speak to what I had personally seen, or what she was telling me now. Fine, she said. I'm telling you now. She's changing the reason, because the original reason isn't holding up. Ashley was quiet. Then she said something I had not expected. I found another old message. I assumed she meant another conversation about the house. Instead, she said, "No, not the house." Her voice had changed. The anger was still there, but something else had moved underneath it. I was looking through Mom's texts because I wanted to see if she had done this before. I sat down. Ashley continued before I could ask anything. "Do you remember your college graduation?" I remembered it very well. I remembered looking for my 17-year-old sister in the audience and eventually accepting Mom's explanation that Ashley had decided she didn't want to come. For years, I had treated it as one of the first clear signs that my sister and I were simply becoming different people. Ashley took a breath. "This isn't the first time Mom told me what you meant." I remembered my college graduation clearly enough to know I had stopped waiting for Ashley before the ceremony started. I was 22, She was 17, and for most of that spring we had barely spoken without Mom somewhere in the middle. The morning of graduation, I kept checking the rows behind my parents because Ashley's seat remained empty. Mom eventually leaned forward and told me not to take it personally. Ashley was going through a phase. She felt uncomfortable around my college friends and had decided to stay home. I told myself I didn't care. By then, I had already learned that admitting I wanted my sister somewhere gave her absence too much power. I walked across the stage, smiled for photographs with my parents, went to dinner, and let Mom explain Ashley's absence as if it were settled fact. On the phone that Friday night, Ashley told me she remembered the same day completely differently. "Mom told me you didn't want me there," she said. I didn't answer immediately because my brain rejected the sentence before it processed it. Ashley continued. "She said you wanted the day to be about your college friends, and that I'd probably feel out of place. She told me not to force myself into something you wanted separate." I asked whether Mom had actually told her I said that. Ashley said yes. Not in quotation marks, not as some dramatic declaration, but clearly enough that 17-year-old Ashley believed staying home was what I preferred. "Do you still have the message?" I asked. "That's why I'm calling." She sent me a screenshot from an old conversation she had recovered after searching Mom's name and a few words she remembered. The message was more than 16 years old. From the morning before my graduation, Mom had written, "Lauren has a lot going on with her friends tomorrow. She wants to keep graduation simple. Don't make yourself miserable if you don't feel like going. She understands." It was not a confession. It did not say, "Lauren told me she doesn't want you there." It was worse in the same quiet way the lake house messages had been worse. Mom had constructed an intention around me without ever quoting me directly. She wanted to keep graduation simple. She understands. Enough certainty for Ashley to act. Enough ambiguity for Mom to deny she had technically lied. I opened my own old messages and searched the same week. I still had the phone archive because I had transferred my texts through every upgrade, like a digital attic I never cleaned. I found one exchange with Mom 2 days before graduation. She had asked whether I wanted everyone to come to dinner afterward. I answered, "Of course. Tell Ashley she can bring Mia if she wants. I know she'll be bored with all my college people." Mia had been Ashley's best friend at the time. I had not only expected my sister to come, I had suggested she bring someone so she would feel more comfortable. I sent the screenshot to Ashley. She stared at it for so long that I thought the call had frozen. "You asked me to bring Mia?" "I asked Mom to tell you. She never did." "I know that now." Ashley looked down at her phone again. "She told me you wanted it small. I thought you didn't want to come. I thought you didn't want me there." Neither of us spoke for a while. There was no satisfying villainous reveal in the silence. Just 16 years of a memory shifting shape. For me, graduation had been one of the early examples I used whenever I explained why Ashley and I weren't close. She hadn't even come. For Ashley, it had apparently been evidence that I was embarrassed by her. Both of us had carried resentment from the same event while believing the other person made the choice. Ashley finally said, "Why didn't you ever ask me?" The question irritated me because it was fair. Why didn't you ask me? I was 17. I was 22, not 80. You were already gone. College, job interviews, everything. You acted like you didn't need anybody. And you acted like you didn't care. She gave a small, bitter laugh. Maybe we were both idiots. Probably. For the first time since the wedding, the conversation did not feel like a trial. We were not deciding which of us deserved the lake house or who had behaved worse at the gate. We were examining one event and finding that both our versions depended on information neither of us had received directly. I told Ashley I did not want to turn one old message into proof that Mom had engineered our entire relationship. People misremembered. Parents simplified. Teenagers misunderstood. If we started treating every disappointing moment from childhood as a conspiracy, we would become exactly as unreliable as the stories we were questioning. Ashley agreed, but she was already scrolling through other old conversations. "What about the Christmas cabin?" she asked. I knew exactly which one she meant. When I was 28, our parents rented a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains for Christmas. It had 4 bedrooms, but one upstairs room had a wide window overlooking the valley. I arrived late because of work. By the time I got there, Ashley had put her luggage in that room, and Mom had assigned me a smaller room downstairs beside the laundry area. It wasn't a tragedy. I remember being annoyed because Mom knew I had specifically asked for the upstairs room after working through most of December. When I complained privately, she told me, "Ashley said you told her you didn't care where you slept." I did what I usually did then. I rolled my eyes, carried my suitcase downstairs, and decided it wasn't worth fighting over a bedroom at Christmas. The incident became one more entry in the private ledger I kept against Ashley. She took what she wanted, Mom protected her, and I was expected to be the adult. Ashley remembered Mom telling her almost the reverse. "She said you were fine downstairs because you got up earlier than everybody and wanted to be near the kitchen," Ashley said. "Why would I want to sleep beside a washing machine because I wake up early? I don't know." It sounded like something you'd say. That was almost funny enough to break the tension. Almost. I searched my messages from that December. There was no perfect proof, no screenshot where Mom explicitly reassigned the room against my wishes. I found a text I had sent her a week before the trip, saying, "Please save me the upstairs room with the big window if possible. I need one peaceful week after this month." Mom had replied with a heart and, "We'll work it out." Ashley found a message from the day before she arrived at the cabin. Mom had written, "Take whichever upstairs room works with your bags. Lauren doesn't care much about rooms as long as she can sleep." Again, not an outrageous fabrication. Not proof of a criminal enterprise. Just Mom converting "we'll work it out" into "Lauren doesn't care." "This one isn't as clear," I said. Ashley nodded. "I know. We shouldn't pretend it proves more than it does." I'm not. But I could see what bothered her. The lake house had trained us to notice the mechanism. Mom often did not need to invent a sentence. She only needed to remove uncertainty. If I had expressed a preference, she softened it. If Ashley expressed a need, she strengthened it. By the time the information crossed from one daughter to the other, my preference sounded optional, and Ashley's sounded urgent. I thought about the bedroom for the first time without making Ashley the center of the memory. I remembered arriving tired and irritated, finding her suitcase upstairs, hearing Mom tell me not to start Christmas with drama. I had never asked Ashley whether she knew I wanted that room. I had assumed she knew because Mom knew. Ashley had assumed I didn't care because Mom told her I didn't. We could not prove Mom had deliberately set us against each other that Christmas. I said that out loud because I needed us to remain honest. Ashley agreed. But intent was beginning to matter less than pattern. Whether Mom consciously thought, "I will make my daughters resent each other," was not something either of us could know. What we could see was that she repeatedly preferred interpretation over direct communication, especially when direct communication might produce conflict she could not control. Then Ashley brought up the months after her daughter was born. That one hurt more. I had believed Ashley wanted space. When the baby was born 8 months earlier, I went to the hospital once and visited the townhouse the following week. After that, I mostly sent food, gifts, and messages through Mom because Mom kept telling me Ashley was exhausted and overwhelmed by visitors. More than once I suggested coming over, and Mom told me it was a bad day. Once, after I had bought groceries and was ready to drive to Charlotte, Mom called and told me Ashley had finally gotten the baby to sleep and didn't want anyone dropping in. I stayed home. Over time, I stopped offering as often. I told myself I was respecting my sister's boundaries. Ashley had not experienced it that way. "I thought you lost interest," she said. My chest tightened. "What?" "You came twice, then Mom was there constantly and you were barely around. She'd say you were busy. Or that you didn't really know what to do with babies. Once she said you told her you didn't want to interfere. I did say I didn't want to interfere." Ashley leaned toward the screen. "Exactly. But that was after Mom told me you wanted fewer visitors." She stared at me. I opened the message thread I remembered. It was from 2 months after the birth. I had written to Mom, If Ashley needs space, I'll stop asking every few days. I don't want to interfere. Just tell her I'm here whenever she wants me. Mom had replied, "That's probably best for now." I sent it to Ashley. She read the screenshot slowly. She never told me the last part. What did she tell you? That you were backing off. I closed my eyes for a moment. Ashley continued. I remember crying one night because Dad asked if you'd been by lately, and I said no. Mom told me not everyone bonds with babies, and that I had to stop expecting you to become a different person just because I was a mother. A wave of anger rose in me so quickly that I had to put my phone down on the desk. I was not angry because Mom had made me look bad. I was angry because there had been an 8-month-old child at the center of all this, my niece, and I had stayed away thinking I was respecting my sister while my sister interpreted my absence as rejection. Do you have that in writing? I asked after a moment. No, she said it to me. Then we treat it as what you remember, not proof. Ashley gave me a tired look. You really cannot stop being you for 5 minutes, can you? No. Fine. Evan remembers me being upset that you weren't visiting. That's useful corroboration that you were upset. It doesn't prove exactly what Mom told you. I know. Her answer was sharper than necessary, but I let it go. We were doing something difficult enough without turning memory into evidence it wasn't. Evan came into view a few minutes later carrying the baby. Ashley told him what we were discussing. He confirmed that there had been several evenings when Ashley complained that I seemed uninterested after the birth. He also remembered asking once whether she had invited me over directly. According to him, Ashley answered that Mom was coordinating visitors because she was helping them so much in those first months. I looked at my sister. Did you ever text me and ask me to come? She shook her head. Why? I thought if you wanted to, you would. The sentence was painfully familiar. That's exactly what I thought about you. Evan lowered himself onto the couch with the baby against his chest. So both of you were waiting for the other person to ignore what Diane said and make direct contact anyway. Neither of us answered because he was right. Ashley reached for the baby's sock and adjusted it unnecessarily. Mom was helping me constantly. I was exhausted. Sometimes I didn't even know what day it was. She'd bring food, clean, hold the baby while I showered. I wasn't sitting there analyzing whether every sentence she said about you was accurate. I understand that. Do you? Yes. Because you keep making it sound like I should have known. I think there were times you should have checked. The lake house was one of them. I don't think being exhausted with a newborn is the same thing. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. That distinction mattered to me. If I wanted Ashley to acknowledge her part in the moving disaster, I could not turn every old mistake into proof that she had always been selfish. There were times she had benefited from Mom's behavior knowingly. There were other times she had simply trusted our mother in moments when trusting her was reasonable. The more complicated the truth became, the more I trusted it. We spent almost 2 hours comparing the 3 incidents. Graduation had the strongest documentation. The Christmas bedroom was mostly conflicting memories supported by messages showing our original preferences, but not a clear, deliberate lie. The postpartum distance showed that Mom had acted as messenger between us and that both of us had made decisions based on what she relayed, but we could not reconstruct every conversation. I wrote the 3 situations down on paper anyway, with separate columns for what I knew, what Ashley knew, what Mom said, and what could actually be supported. It looked less dramatic than a revenge board from a movie. That was fine. Real patterns were often unimpressive, one piece at a time. Nathan came home midway through the call and listened from the kitchen for a few minutes before quietly putting groceries away. When Ashley finally ended the call to feed the baby, he joined me at the table and looked at my notes. How bad? He asked. Messu. That's not an answer. It's not a conspiracy. Good. But it's not random either. I showed him the graduation screenshots first. He immediately saw the contradiction. Nathan nodded slowly. So what's the pattern? I thought about it. Mom hates unresolved answers. He waited. If I say maybe, she turns it into yes or no, depending on what she thinks should happen. If Ashley says she's struggling, Mom turns that into Ashley, needs this specific thing. If one of us is upset, Mom explains what the other person meant instead of making us talk. And who decides what everyone meant? Mom. That was the part I could no longer ignore. I had always described Diane as controlling when I was frustrated with her. But I had thought of control in ordinary terms. She wanted holidays at her house. She had opinions about weddings. She gave advice nobody requested. Plenty of mothers did that. What I was seeing now was more specific. Mom controlled information before she controlled decisions. By the time anyone had to choose something, she had already told each person what everyone else wanted. The lake house was simply the first time the decision was large enough that the process became impossible to overlook. Ashley called again the next morning. She sounded calmer. I've been thinking about graduation. So have I. I was angry at you for years. I was angry at you too. I used to tell people you couldn't even be bothered to notice I wasn't there. I used to tell people you skipped it because you were mad at me. She gave a short laugh without humor. We were both telling the truth as we understood it. That sentence stayed with me. Ashley said she had started wondering whether some of the things Mom told her about me came from actual conversations or from Mom's interpretations. I cautioned her again not to rewrite everything. We did hurt each other sometimes without Mom's help, I said. You and I are not secretly perfect sisters who got separated by an evil mastermind. I know. You borrowed my car in college and returned it empty. I was 17. You also dated Kyle. That was punishment enough. I laughed, and surprisingly, she did too. It was the first genuinely easy moment we had shared since before my wedding. Then her face changed again. There's something else. I waited. I keep thinking about how Mom talked about you when I was pregnant. What did she say? Nothing huge. That's the problem. She'd say things like, you were happy for me, but babies weren't really your world. That you loved your independence. That you probably wouldn't be the kind of aunt who wanted to be around every weekend. Did I ever say that? Not to me. Did she say I said it? Sometimes she'd say, you know, Lauren. I leaned back. That phrase had always sounded affectionate when Mom used it. You know, Lauren. Lauren is practical. Lauren doesn't care about that stuff. Lauren can handle it. Lauren won't mind. 4 words could erase the need to ask me anything. Ashley looked directly at me through the screen. I think I believed her because parts of it sounded like you. Parts probably were me. You are independent. Yes. You don't like people dropping by without calling. Still true. You aren't obsessed with babies. Also true. But none of that meant you didn't want to know my daughter. No? Ashley nodded slowly, as though she was arranging the pieces somewhere inside herself. That's how she does it. I did not correct her this time. That was exactly how Mom did it. She did not create completely fictional versions of us. She selected the parts that supported the outcome she wanted and let the rest disappear. After we ended the call, I spent the afternoon trying to focus on work. I had deadlines, a budget review, and a supplier issue that would have been annoying on any normal week. Strangely, work helped. At work, information had owners. If someone told me production had approved a change, I could ask who approved it and when. Nobody accused me of hating the company because I wanted confirmation. In my family, asking the same question had somehow become an emotional offense. Late that afternoon, Dad called. I almost didn't answer. We had barely spoken since Monday. Hey kiddo, he said, using the same opening he had used since I was 12. Hi, Dad. He asked how work was. I gave him the shortest possible answer and waited. Eventually he sighed. Your mother says you and Ashley have been going through old messages. Of course she knew. Yes. Lauren, I don't think digging through 15 years of family conversations is going to help anybody. We're not digging through 15 years. We looked at 3 specific situations. That's what I mean. No, it isn't. He went quiet. I asked, did Mom tell you why? She says you're trying to prove she's been lying to everybody. I'm trying to find out what actually happened. Sometimes people remember things differently. I agree. Then let it go. I felt something inside me harden. Would you have told me to let the lake house go too? That's different. Why? Because that involved property, and graduation involved my sister. Dad exhaled heavily. I don't want to be in the middle of this. The familiar sentence arrived right on schedule. I looked at the notebook on my desk. Dad, you were listed as the person meeting the moving truck at my gate. He said nothing. You had a role in that. Your mother told me everything was worked out. Did you believe her? At first. 2 words. At first. My attention sharpened. What does that mean? Dad immediately tried to pull back. It means exactly what I said. I thought you two had discussed it. At first. So when did you stop thinking that? Lauren, when did you realize I hadn't agreed? He became irritated. I'm not doing this over the phone. Then come see me. I don't want you turning every conversation into evidence. I don't want every conversation requiring evidence. He was silent long enough that I could hear a television somewhere behind him. Then he said, Your mother was trying to help Ashley. It got out of hand. That was the first time either of my parents had admitted anything had gone wrong. Did you know it was out of hand before the wedding? He did not answer. My pulse picked up. Dad, I have to go. Did you know before Saturday? I said I have to go. The call ended. I sat there with the phone still against my ear. Until that moment, I had thought Dad's part was simple. He avoided conflict. Mom told him I had agreed. He accepted it because accepting it was easier than checking. But his own words had changed that. At first, there had been a point when Thomas Whitaker stopped believing his wife already had my permission. And whatever happened after that point, he had still been prepared to meet a moving truck at my gate. Dad agreed to meet me the following Saturday at a coffee shop almost halfway between Greensboro and Mooresville. He suggested the location, which told me he wanted neutral ground as much as I did. By then, 2 weeks had passed since my wedding. Ashley and I had compared enough messages to know Mom had been translating both of us for years, but I still refused to pretend we knew more than we did. We had proof of the cropped lake house message. We had the moving company work order. We had a documented contradiction around my graduation and weaker but still troubling patterns around the Christmas cabin and the months after my niece was born. What I did not have was a clean answer about Dad. He had told me he believed Mom at first. I wanted to know when that belief ended and what he did after it did. He was already seated when I arrived, both hands around a paper coffee cup he had barely touched. Dad had always looked younger than 65 to me, but that morning he seemed tired in a way I had not noticed at the wedding. He stood when I approached, hugged me awkwardly, then asked whether Nathan had come. I said no. Nathan had offered, but this was one conversation I wanted to have without Dad thinking he was being confronted by my new household. I sat across from him and told him I wasn't there to make him choose between Mom and me. I wanted a timeline. He gave me the expression he used whenever I brought work language into family conversations. Lauren, this isn't one of your operations meetings. I told him I knew. At work, people usually admitted when they had authorized something. Dad looked down at his coffee. I said I was sorry about Monday. You said everything got out of hand. Isn't that basically the same thing? No. He sighed. All right, what do you want to know? I started with the key because it was the simplest physical fact. When did Mom give Ashley my emergency key? Dad rubbed his thumb along the rim of his cup. About a week before the wedding. I asked whether Ashley came to the house to get it. He said Mom brought it to her. Did you know? He nodded. Did you think I had agreed at that point? He hesitated, then said, I thought your mother had it handled. That phrase again. Handled, cleared, settled. Words that sounded official without identifying the person whose permission actually mattered. What did handled mean to you? That she'd talked to you? Did Mom tell you I had said yes? She said you two had talked about the house. That's not what I asked. Dad leaned back. At the time, I assumed she'd gotten your agreement. Then why did you make another key? His eyes came up to mine. I hadn't known for certain there was a duplicate. The original blue-tagged key had been in Ashley's possession until she returned it at the gate. Yet Dad had been listed as the person who would meet the movers. It was possible Mom intended him to use the gate code and let them in without a key, but after everything else I had learned, the simplest explanation was that my parents had preserved their own access before handing mine away. Dad finally said, "I had a copy made." When? The week before the wedding. Before or after Mom gave Ashley the original? After. I let that sit between us. So Mom gave away the only emergency key I had authorized, and then you went out and made another one, so you and Mom would still have access. He winced at the way I phrased it. It wasn't like we were stealing access. We'd had a key for years. You had a key because I gave you one. I know. No, Dad. That's the part I'm not sure you understand. I gave you that specific key because I trusted you with emergency access. I didn't give you permission to transfer it and reproduce it whenever the family needed more copies. He rubbed his face. I should have called you. Yes, I know that now. You knew enough to make a duplicate. His expression tightened. Your mother said Ashley needed the original because the movers were coming Monday. We still needed a way into the house in case there was a storm. Or something happened while you were in Greensboro. It seemed practical. That answer told me more than he intended. If you believed I had already approved Ashley moving in, why didn't you call me and say you were making another emergency key? Dad opened his mouth, then closed it. There was no clean answer. If everything had been legitimate, there would have been no reason to keep the duplicate from me. A simple text would have covered it. Ashley has the original now, so I made another for emergencies. Is that okay? The absence of that message was not proof by itself, but it exposed something Dad had been trying not to say. Even before he knew for certain that I hadn't agreed, some part of him understood the arrangement was shaky enough that contacting me might cause a problem. I asked when he first became suspicious. He said he wasn't sure. I told him to stop trying to give me the safest version and tell me the sequence. Dad looked irritated, but he began. Mom first told him Ashley and Evan needed more room and that I was not going to use the lake house much after the wedding. A few days later, she said she had been working it out with me. Then she told him Ashley could move Monday and asked him to make the duplicate. He did. After that, Dad asked whether I had definitely agreed because he did not want to arrive at the house and discover I knew nothing about it. What did Mom say? Dad stared at the table. Show me. He looked up quickly. What? You still have the messages? I don't know. You keep texts for years. Lauren. Dad, I'm not asking for your whole phone. Search Mom's messages from the week before the wedding. If she told you I agreed, show me and I'll read it. He remained still long enough that I knew he remembered exactly what was there. I don't want to do this to your mother. That sentence surprised me more than if he had simply refused. Do what? Hand you something you're going to use against her. I haven't posted a single screenshot. I haven't sent anything to the family except direct corrections when people asked me questions. That's not what I mean. Then what do you mean? Dad took a breath. She's already convinced you're trying to destroy her reputation. Her reputation isn't the question. What did she tell you before my wedding? He looked toward the window. Cars moved through the parking lot. A couple at the next table were discussing soccer practice. Like the world outside our booth remained completely ordinary. When Dad finally pulled out his phone, his shoulders seemed to drop with the movement. He searched for several seconds, scrolled, stopped, then stared at the screen. I asked her Thursday, he said. The wedding had been Saturday. What did you ask? Whether you had actually agreed. And? Dad did not turn the phone toward me. Instead, he read the message aloud. She wrote, "She hasn't given me a straight yes yet. Don't bring it up again this week. I'll handle it at the reception. Once everyone's excited for Ashley, Lauren won't turn it into a scene." For a moment, all I heard was the espresso machine behind the counter. I had expected something ambiguous. Mom was good at ambiguity. I thought Dad might show me a message saying she was sure I would understand, or that she had almost convinced me, or that she would talk to me after the wedding. Instead, she had written the whole structure plainly enough that there was nothing left to interpret. She knew I had not given her a yes. She knew asking me again before the wedding risked getting a direct no, so she decided not to ask. She would announce it at the reception, Wait for everyone to get excited for Ashley. And depend on me not creating a scene at my own wedding. I held out my hand. Forward that to me. Dad recoiled slightly. Lauren, forward it. I just showed you. No. You read it. I want the message with the date and the thread. He looked genuinely miserable. What are you going to do with it? I don't know yet. That's exactly what worries me. I kept my voice low. You had this message before my wedding, Dad. He looked away. You knew she didn't have my permission. I knew she didn't have a straight yes. I stared at him. What do you think that means? Your mother said you kept avoiding the conversation. I didn't even know there was a conversation. I know that now. You knew then that I hadn't said yes. He pressed his lips together. And you still made the duplicate key. You still let Ashley keep the original. You stayed listed as the person meeting the moving truck. You stood in my reception while Mom announced it. I didn't know she was going to take the microphone like that. The message literally says she'll handle it at the reception. I thought she meant she'd talk to you there. Privately? He didn't answer. I leaned back and waited. I had learned that silence could be dangerous when I used it to avoid correcting lies. But silence had another use. Sometimes it forced a person to sit with the answer they were trying not to give. Dad finally forwarded the message. My phone vibrated on the table. I opened it, checked the date, and saved the screenshot. I did not feel triumphant. Mostly I felt tired. There had been a small part of me still hoping Dad was simply a man who had believed his wife too easily. That would have been cowardly but familiar. The message changed the category. He had known there was no yes and chosen not to interfere, because interfering would have required him to challenge Mom before the damage became public. He watched me save it. I should have stopped it. Yes, I thought once your mother announced it, you'd probably work something out with Ashley. Why? He shrugged helplessly. Because that's what you usually do. There was the family math again. Mom created the pressure. Dad assumed I would absorb it. Ashley accepted the benefit. Then everyone called the result harmony. I asked him why Monday had been chosen. He said Mom knew Nathan and I were returning to work after the wedding because our honeymoon was delayed until later in the year. That part was true. Nathan had a project deadline, and I had a quarterly review scheduled. We had deliberately chosen to take only the wedding weekend off and travel later when work calmed down. Mom had heard us mention it more than once. She thought you'd be in Greensboro, Dad said. And you? I assumed you'd be working too. So the truck was supposed to arrive while I was 2 hours away. Dad shook his head. It wasn't some burglary plan, Lauren. I didn't say it was. You're making it sound like we were sneaking into the house. Were you planning to call me before you opened the gate? His silence answered. Dad tried to explain that Mom believed it would be easier if Ashley's things were already there. Once the crib was set up and the boxes were inside, everyone could calm down and discuss details without the pressure of moving day. He said it as though the logic were meant to make the plan seem less manipulative. It did the opposite. You were going to create the result first and discuss permission after. I wasn't thinking of it that way. How were you thinking of it? That your mother was trying to solve a problem. A problem Ashley didn't need solved with my house. He rubbed his eyes. Your sister wanted more room. She still had a home. I know. She wasn't being evicted. I know. No emergency. I know. So the emergency was that Mom wanted Ashley in my house before I could say no. Dad flinched. She thought once they were there you wouldn't make them leave. That was the first completely honest sentence he had given me. I thought about Mom at the gate asking whether I would really put a baby out. The line had not been improvised. It was the entire plan. Get Ashley inside, put the crib upstairs, stack boxes in the bedrooms. Let my niece's things make the arrangement feel physical and established. Then turn my attempt to recover my own house into the cruel action. My being at the gate Monday had broken the plan before that emotional leverage existed. Dad looked at me and said, I know this doesn't excuse me. Then don't excuse yourself. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I believe that. He seemed surprised. I don't think you wanted me hurt. I think you wanted to avoid being uncomfortable. His face closed. You keep saying you didn't want to get in the middle, I continued. But you made the duplicate key. You were the access contact for the movers. You knew Mom didn't have a yes. You stayed quiet at the wedding. Those aren't the actions of someone outside the situation. What do you want me to say? The truth? I've told you the truth. Then say why you didn't stop her. Dad looked down at his hands. Because every time I challenge your mother about Ashley, it becomes a week of fighting. She says I don't care about the baby, that I always take your side because you're easier, that I leave her to handle everything. And I thought you'd say no, get angry for a few days, then eventually let Ashley stay for a while because you wouldn't want the family fighting. I felt something settle into place. You chose the side that required the least courage. Dad looked at me sharply. That's unfair. Is it? He did not answer. I told him I wasn't cutting him out of my life. I wasn't asking him to leave Mom. I wasn't demanding some grand public apology, but he would not get another emergency key to the lake house. And I was no longer going to treat I didn't want to get involved as a neutral position when his actions said otherwise. Dad nodded reluctantly. I hope you do. Before we left, he asked me not to send the message to the whole family. I told him I had no plan to. The truth did not become more true because more people saw it. I needed the message because Mom had been telling different people that I changed my mind. Nathan influenced me, or I had backed out at the last minute. Now I knew something none of those versions could survive. Before the wedding, she had acknowledged in writing that she did not have my yes. On the drive home, I called Nathan through the car system and told him what Dad had shown me. I did not say Mom had wanted to steal my house. She hadn't. The house was useful, but ownership itself wasn't what she was after. What she wanted was control of the decision. She had decided Ashley should live there, decided my reasons for saying no would be less important than Ashley's reasons for wanting yes, and then built enough public momentum that she expected compliance to replace consent. Nathan listened until I finished. So what now? I looked at the phone resting in the console with Dad's forwarded message saved on it. I stopped trying to convince everybody one at a time. For 2 weeks, I had been answering individual stories as they reached me. Nathan made me selfish. I changed my mind. Ashley had misunderstood. Mom meant temporary. Dad thought everyone agreed. Each version forced me to chase another correction. I finally had enough to see the real problem. It wasn't that Mom had lied better than I could explain. It was that the family had spent years accepting second-hand answers. Dad had spent years saying he stayed out of family fights. The message in my phone proved he had been standing inside this one before I even knew it existed. By the 3rd week after my wedding, I had enough evidence to make my mother look terrible if that had been my goal. I had the moving company record showing she had booked a truck for property she did not own. I had the full message she had cropped before forwarding it to Ashley. I had Dad's text proving Mom knew she did not have a clear yes from me before the reception and expected the room to pressure me into cooperating. I could have attached everything to one long family email, copied every relative who had attended the wedding, and spent an evening explaining exactly how Diane Whitaker manufactured an agreement that had never existed. For about 10 minutes, sitting at my kitchen table with Nathan, I seriously considered it. Then I realized that would still make Mom the center of the system. Everyone would read my evidence, decide whether they believed her or me, and keep treating family information like something that needed a spokesperson. I did not want to become the new spokesperson. I wanted to remove the job. So I sent a much shorter message to the relatives who had actually been pulled into the lake house story. I did not send it to the entire wedding guest list. Most people at the reception had done nothing more than applaud an announcement they reasonably assumed had been agreed upon. Aunt, Melissa, Rachel, Uncle Brian, Dad, Ashley, Evan, and a few others had either been told versions beforehand or contacted me afterward. They were the people who needed clarification. I wrote that the lake house belonged to me, that I had never offered it to Ashley and Evan, and that the attempted move had never been authorized by me. Then I added one sentence that mattered more than the rest. If anyone was ever told that I had agreed to something, I wanted them to confirm it directly with me. Nathan read the message before I sent it. "That's it?" he asked. "That's it. No screenshots?" "No. No dramatic closing statement. I just got married. I'm saving those for our anniversary. He smiled, then became serious again. Your mom is going to hate that last sentence. I know. That was partly why I knew it was the correct sentence. Mom could argue about whether Ashley deserved more space. She could argue that I was cold, technical, selfish, newly married, overly influenced by Nathan, or obsessed with ownership. What she could not reasonably argue was that people should not be allowed to ask me what I had actually said. The first reply came from Melissa. She wrote, "Understood. I'm sorry I assumed." Rachel sent something similar. Uncle Brian simply said, "Fair enough." There was no family explosion. No one announced that they were taking my side. Nobody declared Mom a liar. The entire exchange was almost boring, and I found that more satisfying than the public showdown I had briefly imagined. A boring system was exactly what I wanted. Somebody said Lauren agreed. Somebody asked Lauren. Lauren answered. Done. Mom began trying to break it within 2 days. Melissa called me on a Wednesday evening. She sounded uncomfortable before she even got to the point. "I don't want to be in the middle," she said, which apparently was the official slogan of our extended family. "But Diane told me Nathan has been encouraging you to distance yourself from everybody." I was standing at the kitchen counter cutting vegetables while Nathan worked in the dining room. I did not look at him. "Did you hear that from me?" Melissa paused. "No." "Did you hear it from Nathan?" "No." "Then you don't know that." Another pause. "That's fair," she said. I went back to chopping. Melissa seemed almost disappointed that I did not offer a defense of my marriage. She said, "You've changed." "I probably have." You know what she means. I do. But if Mom wants to talk about something I said or did, she can talk about something I actually said or did. Melissa sighed. "I think she believes she's losing you." That was the kind of sentence that could have dragged me back into the old role instantly. Poor Mom was scared. Mom meant well. Mom was only controlling because she cared. The old version of me would have started explaining that I still loved my parents, that I wasn't trying to punish anyone, that I had only wanted my property respected. I had spent years answering emotional accusations that nobody had actually made to my face. Instead, I said, "If Mom feels that way, she can call me." Melissa was quiet for a second, then said, "Right, she can." After we hung up, Nathan looked over from the dining table. "What did I do this time?" "Apparently you're isolating me." He glanced around our open kitchen and living room. "I'm doing a terrible job." I laughed, but I did not tell him we needed to prove anything. That was another change. Nathan did not have to audition as a good husband every time Mom made him useful to her story. If she claimed he controlled me, the burden was not on us to perform independence loudly enough for the family to approve. Ashley called the next night. She had been quieter since our conversations about graduation and the months after her daughter was born. We were speaking more often than we had before the wedding, but not in the sentimental way people like to imagine estranged sisters suddenly reconnect. Some calls were awkward. Sometimes one of us became defensive and had to start over. She was still angry that I had stopped the move at the gate. I was still angry that she had packed an entire townhouse without calling me. The difference was that when we got angry now, the conversation happened between us. That night she asked, "What do you think I should do about Mom?" I knew what she wanted. Not because I could read her mind, but because I had wanted the same thing from other people. A clean answer. A reasonable plan. A person outside the conflict to tell me what the correct boundary was, so that if it hurt somebody, part of the responsibility belonged to them. "I don't know," I said. Ashley frowned. "That's helpful. I'm serious. I can tell you what Mom said about me. I can show you what she sent me. I can tell you what Dad showed me. I can't decide what relationship you should have with her. You're the one who figured all this out. That doesn't make me your mother." She gave me a look through the screen. "Very funny." "I'm not trying to be funny." She went quiet. I continued. "If I tell you how often Mom should see the baby, whether you should let her babysit, whether you should answer her calls, Then we're doing the same thing again. Somebody else is deciding what your relationship means. Ashley leaned back against her couch. So, what am I supposed to do? Ask yourself what you trust her with right now. I don't know. Then you don't have to pretend you do. She rubbed her forehead. Evan thinks we should stop letting her just show up. How do you feel about that? I hate that you're doing this. Doing what? Making me answer my own questions. I smiled. Occupational hazard. Her expression softened despite herself. Then she said, I think he's right. That was enough. I did not tell her what rule to make. I did not tell her she needed to protect my niece from Mom. I did not suggest no contact or reduced contact or forgiveness. I told her that if she ever wanted to know what I had said, she could ask me. Everything else belonged to her. The changes around the family started so small that I almost missed them. Dad texted me the next week and wrote, Are you free for dinner next Thursday? There was no, your mother wants to know. No, Mom says we're thinking about dinner. Just a question from him to me. I told him I couldn't do Thursday but could do Sunday afternoon. He replied that he would check his schedule and get back to me. It was ordinary enough that I stared at the exchange longer than it deserved. Melissa texted Ashley directly about a family lunch. I only knew because Ashley forwarded the message to me with 3 words. Look at this. Melissa had asked whether Ashley and Evan planned to come and whether they needed a high chair. She had not asked Mom whether Ashley was free. She had not asked me what Ashley wanted. It was the kind of communication normal families probably never noticed, because nobody had trained them to expect a middleman. I replied, Careful. Next thing you know, people will start speaking for themselves. Ashley sent back, terrifying. Dad called me again a few days later. He sounded tentative, which I suspected had less to do with me than with the atmosphere at his house. Your mother is wondering if you two are coming over Sunday, he said. I caught it immediately. Dad. He stopped. Is Mom wondering, or are you inviting me? He exhaled. I'm inviting you. Okay. Ask me. There was a short silence. Then he started again. Would you and Nathan like to come for dinner Sunday? I'll check with Nathan and let you know. All right. It was not an apology. It was not redemption. It was one sentence corrected in real time. That was what change looked like when it wasn't being written for an audience. Mom noticed too. She called me late that Friday. Her voice was controlled in the way it became when she had been angry long enough to organize it. I hope you're happy. I was sitting on the back steps with a cup of tea while Nathan watered some plants he had insisted we could keep alive despite evidence to the contrary. About what? Everyone is acting like they need written permission to speak now. I haven't asked anyone to get anything in writing. You know exactly what you've done. I asked people to check with me if someone says I agreed to something. You've taught them not to trust me. No. I've told them not to use you as proof of what I said. Same thing. It really isn't. Mom went quiet for a second. Families cannot function this way, Lauren. What way? If every conversation has to be verified and documented and checked, like some business transaction, nobody will ever relax around each other. I'm not asking for documentation. I'm asking for direct conversation. She gave a bitter laugh. You always have a neat phrase for everything. Then ignore the phrase. If Melissa wants to know whether Ashley is coming to lunch, she can ask Ashley. If Dad wants to invite me to dinner, he can ask me. If you want to know whether I agreed to something, you can ask me. I did ask you. No. You asked whether I was using the lake house. Then you decided what my answer meant. Her voice rose. Because I know you. Knowing me isn't the same as speaking for me. I am your mother. Yes. The simplicity of the answer seemed to frustrate her more than an argument would have. Mom changed direction. Do you have any idea what you're doing to Ashley? She's questioning everything now. That's between you and Ashley. She used to call me first. There was something different in her voice when she said that. Not anger exactly. Fear was too strong a word for something I could only hear through a phone. But the sentence carried more emotion than anything she had said about the house. She had not sounded this upset when I changed the locks. She had not sounded this upset when the moving truck turned around. She sounded upset because Ashley was no longer automatically calling her first. I noticed it. I did not tell her what I thought it meant. Then talk to Ashley, I said. You know she's upset. I know what she's told me. Can't you just tell her I was trying to help? There it was. Mom wanted to send a message through me about the dangers of sending messages through her. No, Loren, if you want Ashley to know what you meant, tell Ashley. She won't listen to me right now. Then you may have to wait until she will. Mom accused me of enjoying this. I told her I wasn't. She said I had always been resentful of how much she helped Ashley. I told her that was not the conversation we were having. She said Nathan had filled my head with corporate nonsense about boundaries. I asked whether she had heard that from Nathan. She hung up. Ashley called me later that night. She sounded exhausted. The baby had been difficult all afternoon. Evan was finishing some work from home, and Mom had called twice. Ashley said, I told her she can't just come over tomorrow. I waited. Ashley continued, I told her if she wants to visit, she needs to call me or Evan first. And we're taking a break from her watching the baby by herself until I feel less angry. I did not know what Mom had said during that conversation because I had not been there. And I did not ask Ashley to perform it for me. I only asked, how do you feel? Awful. Because you think the boundary is wrong? No. Then what feels awful? She looked down. She cried. I nodded. That can still be real. Ashley looked at me. Mom can be genuinely hurt, and you can still mean what you said. I keep thinking I'm punishing her with the baby. Are you? I don't think so. I don't want to keep her away forever. I just don't want her assuming she can come over or take over childcare like nothing happened. Then that's what you're doing. Ashley was silent for a while. Mom asked if this was your idea. Of course she had. What did you tell her? For the first time since the wedding, Ashley smiled without any bitterness in it. I told her no. Then her expression steadied. I told her it was mine. By early May, the lake house had almost stopped coming up in my daily life. The locks were changed. The original blue-tagged key was back with me. No movers had returned. No one had challenged my ownership, because there was nothing to challenge. The practical problem had been solved before April ended. What remained was harder because it could not be fixed with a locksmith, a gate code, or a screenshot. Ashley had told Mom that visits and childcare needed to be arranged with her or Evan instead of assumed. Mom had heard the words. The question was whether she believed they applied to her. I found out on a Tuesday evening when Ashley called me while I was cleaning up after dinner. Her voice sounded strained enough that I set the dish towel down before she got through hello. She came over today, she said. Mom? Who else? I leaned against the kitchen counter. Did she call first? No. That one word told me most of what I needed to know. I did not ask Ashley to reenact every second as if I had been standing in her hallway. I hadn't. Everything I knew about that afternoon came from what she told me afterward, and from Evan when he joined the call a few minutes later. According to Ashley, Mom had shown up carrying grocery bags, diapers, and a package of the baby wipes she knew they used. Normally, that would have been enough to get her through the door. For 8 months, Mom had operated on an open-door policy nobody had formally created. If she happened to be nearby, she stopped in. If she bought groceries, she brought them over. If she thought Ashley looked tired, she stayed and held the baby. Most of that help had been real help. That was exactly why changing the rules felt so ugly to Ashley. The baby had just fallen asleep, she told me. I hadn't showered. The place was a mess. I opened the door and she started telling me she brought enough food for the week. What did you say? I told her today wasn't good. I waited. Ashley gave a small, humorless laugh. She thought I meant she should come back after the baby woke up. That sounded like Mom. A no was rarely a conclusion when she preferred a different answer. It was a scheduling obstacle. Ashley said she repeated herself. She told Mom they had already discussed this. Visits needed to be arranged beforehand. Mom replied that she was not a visitor. She was the baby's grandmother. What did you tell her? I asked. That being Grandma didn't make our door disappear. I smiled despite myself. That's pretty good. Don't sound proud. I almost ruined it 30 seconds later. She said Mom had looked at the grocery bags and asked whether Ashley seriously expected her to take everything home after driving all the way there. Then came the sentence Ashley had probably heard in 100 forms since childhood. "After everything I do for you?" Ashley went quiet as she repeated it to me. I understood why that line hit harder than anything Mom had said about the lake house. Mom had done a lot for Ashley. She had shown up after the baby was born. She had cooked meals, run errands, washed bottles, folded laundry, and sat with a crying infant so Ashley could sleep. Those things did not become fake because Mom also overstepped. That was what made the guilt effective. It was built on something true. "What did you do?" I asked. I almost let her in. There was no pride in Ashley's voice now. I actually moved backward. I had my hand on the door, and I thought, this is ridiculous. She's my mother. She bought groceries. Just let her sit down for an hour. I said nothing. Then I thought about Monday. Not the truck. The part where she kept saying she knew what you meant. I stayed quiet because this was Ashley's conclusion to reach, not mine to improve. She continued. If I let her in because she decided today was convenient, then the new rule only exists when she agrees with it. That sounds right. So I told her, I appreciate what you brought, but I asked you to call first. Mom had apparently answered, I knew you needed help. Ashley told her, that's why I need you to ask first. There was a long silence on my end of the call. Not because the sentence was brilliant. It wasn't. It was simple enough that most families probably used some version of it without remembering. What mattered was who had said it. For most of our lives, Ashley had received Mom's certainty as a kind of service. Mom knew when she needed help. Mom knew what she meant. Mom knew what Lauren meant. Mom knew what would be best. Ashley had benefited from that system far more often than I had, which made it easier for her to accept. Now she was telling the person who helped her most that help still required permission. What happened then? I asked. She cried. Ashley said it quickly, almost defensively. I closed my eyes for a second. Okay, that's all you have to say? What do you want me to say? I don't know. Tell me she was manipulating me. I wasn't there. You know how she is. I know what she's done with me. I know what you've told me. I don't know whether she decided to cry or couldn't help it. Ashley looked frustrated through the screen. You're being annoyingly reasonable. I work hard at it. But what am I supposed to do with that? If she was genuinely hurt, then I hurt her. Probably. She stared at me. I picked up the dish towel, then put it down again. A boundary doesn't guarantee nobody gets hurt by it, Ashley. So, you think I did the right thing. I think you told her to call first, and then you acted like you meant it. That is not an answer. It is the only one I'm giving you. Evan appeared behind her then and asked whether she had told me the rest. Ashley said there was no rest. He gave her a look. What? I asked. Evan sat beside her. After Diane left, Ashley wanted to call her back and tell her to return. Ashley rolled her eyes. Thank you. You asked me whether you should. I was upset. I know. I looked at my sister. Did you call her? No. Why? Ashley glanced at Evan. He answered carefully. I asked her whether the rule had changed. That was all he had done. He had not declared Mom banned from the house. He had not told Ashley to cut her off. He had not become the husband protecting his wife from her terrible mother. He had asked whether the rule they had made together still existed. Ashley said, I told him no. The rule hadn't changed. So you didn't call. No. I could hear how much effort that simple decision had cost her. Evan said they were not trying to keep Mom away from the baby. They were not even saying she could not help. They were saying help had to happen inside the choices of the people who lived in the house. If she calls tomorrow and Ashley wants her here, great, he said. If the rule only applies until Diane arrives holding groceries, it isn't much of a rule. Ashley looked at him. I know. There was affection in the irritation between them. Their marriage had taken damage from the lake house mess, because Evan had been told I wanted them there, and learned only at the gate that Ashley could not support that claim. But he had not turned the mistake into permanent leverage over her. He was asking her to become more direct, not less independent. After we ended the call, Nathan found me sitting at the kitchen table with my phone still in my hand. What happened? Ashley didn't let Mom into the townhouse. His eyebrows rose. Seriously? Mom showed up without calling. And Ashley said no? Eventually, Nathan pulled out the chair across from me. That's probably the first time she's ever done that. Maybe. You don't sound very pleased. I knew what he meant. 3 weeks earlier, if someone had told me Ashley would shut the door on an unannounced visit from Mom, I would have considered it proof that something fundamental had changed. Now that it had happened, I mostly felt tired for her. I think she's going to feel guilty for 2 days, I said. Probably. And then Mom's going to find another way to make her explain it. Probably. I looked at him. You're very supportive. I'm an engineer. We respect repeatable patterns. That made me laugh. Then he said, You fixed the lake house in 48 hours. I know. You keep expecting the rest of this to work like that. I started to argue and stopped. He was right. I had changed codes, replaced locks, organized messages, separated documented evidence from memory, and built a direct contact rule. Those were problems I understood. Give me a broken process, and I could usually identify where information failed, remove the failure point, and establish a better procedure. Feelings did not follow procedures. Ashley could understand intellectually that Mom had crossed a line and still missed the version of her mother who walked in carrying dinner when she was exhausted. Dad could admit he enabled Mom and still instinctively protect her the next time conflict became uncomfortable. I could recognize years of distorted communication and still feel the old urge to dismiss hurt rather than explain it. I thought if everybody just asked the right person, the problem would mostly disappear, I admitted. Nathan shook his head. The bad information might, not the damage. No, that was another flaw I had to own. I had spent years believing logic was enough because logic was cleaner than vulnerability. If somebody misunderstood me, part of me thought they should have known better. If I was hurt, I fixed whatever could be fixed and moved on. I did not want to become someone who explained every feeling to every relative. But there was a difference between refusing to perform pain and pretending pain no longer existed, because the process had been corrected. 2 days later, Aunt Melissa called. She sounded hesitant. Can I ask you something about Ashley? You can ask. Is she really not letting Diane see the baby? I did not answer the question. Where did you hear that? Melissa sighed. Your mother. Of course. What exactly did she say? That Ashley is keeping the baby from her and that you're encouraging it. I looked across my office at the clock. I had a meeting in 12 minutes. A month earlier, I might have spent 11 of them correcting Mom's version. Instead, I said, I can't tell you what Ashley's rules are. You should ask Ashley. Melissa paused, but you know what's going on. I know what Ashley has told me. That doesn't make me her spokesperson. I'm not trying to put you in the middle. Then don't. There was no anger in my voice. I wasn't punishing Melissa. She had done what our family always did when communication became uncomfortable. She called the person who seemed easier. Melissa said she understood and ended the call. That evening, Ashley called me again. Aunt Melissa called, she said. I know. You sent her to me? I told her I couldn't answer for you. Ashley stared at me for a moment, then smiled faintly. That's new. For both of us. She told me Melissa had asked whether Mom was banned from seeing the baby. Ashley explained no. Mom was still welcome to visit. They had already agreed on lunch the following weekend. She simply could not arrive whenever she wanted or assume she was providing childcare without Ashley or Evan asking. What did Melissa say? She said that sounded reasonable. I smiled. Imagine that. Ashley did not laugh. Mom made it sound like I was cutting her out. She may feel cut out. I'm not doing that. I know. Do you think everyone else knows? Ask them. She gave me an irritated look, and I could see the lesson becoming annoying enough to stick. The next small shift came from Dad. He texted me rather than calling. The message said, If your mother needs to ask you something, I'm going to let her ask you herself. "I'm done carrying messages between you two." I read it twice. There was no apology attached. No request that I praise him for becoming a different man. He was simply changing one behavior. I replied, "Good." Nathan saw the exchange later and asked whether I believed Dad. I believe he sent the text. That's very you. He gets more trust when the behavior repeats. Also very you. I could live with that. Mom did not call me for several days. I later learned from Ashley that she did call ahead before the next visit. Ashley said she almost laughed when she saw Mom's name on the phone and heard, "Would tomorrow afternoon work?" The visit happened. No doors were slammed. Nobody was permanently cut off. Mom spent time with her granddaughter and went home. But something important had changed before she ever walked inside. She had asked. A week earlier, that requirement had apparently felt insulting enough to make her cry on Ashley's doorstep. Now it was becoming the price of entry. I had once assumed the lake house was where Mom would feel the consequence most sharply. She had planned the move, booked the truck, transferred the key, and chosen my wedding as the place to announce it. Being stopped at the gate should have been the obvious defeat. It wasn't. Mom had recovered from losing the house plan almost immediately by changing the story around it. What unsettled her was losing the automatic right to decide when Ashley needed her, when she could enter, what help counted, and what other people meant. Ashley called me one Sunday night after Mom's second scheduled visit. The baby was asleep. Evan was watching television behind her, and she looked more settled than she had in weeks. "I thought saying no to her would make me feel cruel," she said. "Did it?" "For about an hour. And after that?" She thought for a moment. "Mostly, it made me realize something." I waited. Ashley looked directly at me through the screen. Mom almost never made me say yes out loud. She just kept doing things until I went along with them. That was the difference between us I had never understood. I had spent years resenting Ashley because Mom gave her more. Ashley had spent years becoming so accustomed to being helped that she rarely had to decide where help ended and control began. Now, for the first time I could remember, she was making that decision herself. And for the first time in her life, my sister had closed a door on our mother without asking me whether she was allowed to. By June, the strangest thing about my family was how ordinary, direct communication had started to feel. Aunt Melissa texted me if she wanted to know whether Nathan and I were coming to dinner. Dad called Ashley if he wanted to see the baby. Evan stopped accepting plans that arrived through Mom without asking where they came from. None of this should have felt revolutionary. It was a collection of small adult habits most people probably never thought about. But in our family, those habits kept exposing how often one person's certainty had replaced everyone else's actual words. Mom adjusted badly at first. She did not openly challenge the new pattern every time. That would have made it too obvious. Instead, she kept testing the edges. She told Melissa that Ashley was probably too tired for a Sunday lunch. Melissa called Ashley anyway. Ashley said she would love to come. Mom told Dad that Nathan and I were planning to spend the 4th of July weekend at the lake. Dad asked me before arranging anything around it. We had no such plan. Mom told Ashley that I wanted to keep the lake house quiet for a while because of everything that had happened. Ashley texted me directly before turning down an invitation from Evan's brother to spend a day there with us. I told her I had said no such thing. Every time one of those stories collapsed, Mom described the correction as unnecessary. She had been making a reasonable assumption. She had misunderstood. She was only trying to simplify things. Sometimes she truly may have been. I stopped caring about proving intent in every small instance. The new rule did not require us to decide whether Mom was manipulative each time. It only required us not to outsource our own answers to her. That distinction helped Ashley more than I expected. She and Evan had begun looking at larger rentals closer to his work, not because their townhouse had suddenly become unbearable, and not because Mom had been right that they needed rescuing, but because they had finally sat down together and decided more space would be useful if they could afford it. They made a budget, toured 3 places, rejected 2, and kept their current townhouse while they looked. For the first time, The housing conversation had nothing to do with my lake house or Mom's opinion of what Ashley deserved. Ashley called me after one of the tours and said, "We found a place with a small yard. Do you like it?" "I do. Evan thinks the commute might be annoying." "Then talk about the commute." "I knew you'd say that." "What did you want me to say?" She smiled. "I don't know. Maybe tell me whether we should take it." "No. You're getting unbearable." "I've always been unbearable. Mom just used to summarize me better." Ashley laughed, but the joke landed on something we still had not fully dealt with. We had spent weeks uncovering what Mom had said, what Dad had enabled, and how the wedding announcement had been designed to put me in a public trap. It would have been easy for Ashley to let that evidence turn her into another victim of Mom's choices. I was not willing to let her do that. The conversation happened one Saturday afternoon at the lake house. It was the first time Ashley had been there since the moving truck turned around. Nathan and Evan were outside near the grill, while the baby slept in a portable crib upstairs. Ashley and I sat at the kitchen island with iced tea between us. She had been quiet since arriving, looking around the rooms she had once expected to occupy, as if she were seeing them under different lighting. Finally, she said, "I still feel stupid." I knew what she meant. "About Monday?" "About all of it. You were lied to." She looked at me quickly. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "It can be true without making you innocent." Her mouth tightened. "There she is." "What?" "Corporate Lauren. Would you prefer dishonest Lauren?" She looked out toward the deck. "No." I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I said, "Mom told you things that weren't true." She cropped my message. "She told you she'd cleared the house with me. She told you Monday was fine. That's on her." Ashley nodded. "But you told Evan I wanted you here." She looked down. "You didn't say Mom thought I'd agree. You didn't say Mom was handling it. You told him I wanted you here. Because I believed it." "Not completely." Her eyes came back to mine. I continued before she could turn defensive. "You admitted at the gate that you didn't call me because you thought I might say no." Ashley rubbed the condensation from her glass with one finger. "I know. Then part of you understood there was something to verify. I trusted Mom. You also liked the answer." She flinched. I did not soften the sentence. I wasn't trying to punish her. This was the one part of the story she needed to own if anything between us was going to change. If every bad choice she made could be explained away as something Mom caused, then all we had done was replace one person speaking for Ashley with another. After a while, she said, "You're right." I had expected an argument, so the answer caught me off guard. Ashley looked toward the window again. "I wanted the house. I know. I wanted the yard. I wanted the extra bedroom. I wanted to be closer to Mom. I wanted to stop feeling like we were squeezing baby stuff into every corner of the townhouse. And when Mom told me you'd offered it, I didn't want to ask a question that might take it away. I said nothing. That's the truth," she continued. "I didn't sit there thinking, Lauren never said yes, but I'm taking it anyway. It wasn't that deliberate. I just kept accepting every version that made the move easier. That's what bothered me. I know now. The admission mattered more to me than an apology would have. Sorry could be sincere and still leave the same pattern intact." Ashley had finally named the choice beneath her ignorance. She had not known everything, but she had protected herself from knowing more. She said, "I was angry with you when you changed the gate code. I noticed. I thought you were trying to humiliate me. I was trying to keep you out of my house. Those felt like the same thing at the time. I believe you." She smiled faintly. "You don't make anything easy. I think that's one of the complaints against me." Then she became serious. "I need you to know something else. If Mom hadn't done all this, I still might have resented you." That surprised me. "Why?" Ashley looked embarrassed. "Because you had choices I didn't think I had. I waited. You had the job, the lake house. You weren't asking Mom for help every week. You got married and still looked like yourself. I had a baby and suddenly every conversation was about what I needed. I think part of me hated that you could say no without everything falling apart. It would have been easy to answer defensively. I had worked for what I had. Ashley had made her own choices. Nobody had forced her into motherhood or dependence. All of that could be true, and still miss what she was trying to tell me. So when Mom said I already had enough, I said, "Part of you agreed." Ashley nodded. "That still doesn't make my house available." "I know." "Good." She laughed once. I walked into that. We did not hug and declare ourselves healed. That would have been dishonest too. There were still years of resentment neither of us could neatly assign to Mom. Some of it belonged to her. Some belonged to us. Some probably came from being sisters with different temperaments, who had spent too much time assuming the worst because asking directly felt harder. But from that afternoon forward, Ashley stopped describing the lake house disaster as something Mom did to both of us. She started saying, "Mom lied, and I didn't check." That was the version I trusted. The consequences for Mom became clearer as summer began. Ashley and Evan stopped using her as their default childcare solution. They still invited her over. She still saw her granddaughter, but they began arranging backup care through a sitter Evan's co-worker recommended, and sometimes they asked his mother instead. Mom hated that last part enough that even Dad noticed. He told me during a phone call that she kept asking why Ashley needed anyone else when she had a grandmother available. "What did you tell her?" I asked. Dad sighed. "That Ashley gets to decide." I smiled despite myself. "Don't sound so shocked." "I'm not shocked. You sound shocked. I'm documenting growth," he groaned. "You really are your own worst stereotype." Dad was changing too, slowly and unevenly. He had not earned back the lake house key and never asked for it. More importantly, he had stopped defending his silence as neutrality. Once, when Mom told him to call me and explain what she meant, he refused. I knew only because Mom later complained to me about it herself. "Your father has decided he's not allowed to communicate now," she said. "He can communicate. He told me to call you myself." That sounds like communication. She did not appreciate that answer. Mom and I still spoke. I had not cut her off. I called on her birthday. Nathan and I went to dinner at my parents' house once in June. The conversation was stiff but civil. Mom asked about work, criticized Dad's grilling, showed us new photographs of the baby, and avoided the lake house completely. For almost an hour, I thought maybe she had accepted the new reality. Then Aunt Melissa mentioned a family barbecue she was planning for July. Mom immediately said, "Lauren and Nathan probably won't come. They like keeping their weekends to themselves now." The old reflex was so smooth she seemed not to notice she had done it. Melissa turned to me. "Are you coming?" Mom's face changed. I looked at Melissa. "What's the date?" She told me. "I think we can. I'll check with Nathan." Great. That was it. No confrontation, no lecture. Mom moved on to another subject, but she barely spoke to me for the rest of dinner. On the drive home, Nathan said, "She really doesn't like being bypassed." She wasn't bypassed. You know what I mean. I did. For years, Mom had experienced family closeness partly through being necessary. If everyone communicated directly, she was still a mother, wife, grandmother, sister, and aunt. She simply was not the central switchboard anymore. That should have been enough. It wasn't. The July barbecue was held at Melissa's house outside Charlotte. Ashley and Evan came with the baby. Dad arrived early to help with chairs. Mom behaved beautifully for most of the afternoon. She brought dessert, complimented Ashley's new haircut, and did not once mention the lake house fight. I almost believed we were entering the boring phase of recovery. Then Melissa started talking about Christmas. It was still months away, but in my family holiday planning began absurdly early. She asked whether everyone wanted to rotate hosting that year because her house had been packed the previous Christmas. Mom answered before anyone else could. "We don't need to rotate. Lauren already offered the lake house." The conversation around the patio table stopped. I had never offered that. I had not even discussed Christmas with Mom. For a fraction of a second, the old scene replayed itself in miniature. My mother spoke. A family plan appeared. Everyone else was expected to arrange themselves around it. But this time nobody applauded. Melissa looked directly at me. "Did you?" I looked at her. "No. That was all it took." No gasp. No argument. No one asked whether Mom had misunderstood me or whether I had changed my mind. Melissa simply nodded and said, "Okay, then we'll figure out something else." A few months earlier, that answer would have been the beginning of a family crisis. Somebody would have tried to soften it. Dad would have said I probably meant not yet. Mom would have explained what I really wanted. Ashley might have stayed quiet because contradicting Mom in front of relatives felt disloyal. This time, the answer reached the person who had asked the question. And then it stopped. Mom looked from Melissa to me. "Lauren, we talked about Christmas." "No, we didn't. We talked about using the lake house more with the family." "You talked about it." Her voice sharpened. "You said you wanted things to be different." "I do." "Then why are you making this difficult?" I could feel the old invitation inside that question. Defend myself. Explain that I loved my family. Prove I wasn't selfish. Turn the conversation away from what Mom had just done and toward whether hosting Christmas would be a generous thing for me to do. If I accepted that argument, she had already won half of it. We would be debating the reasonableness of a decision she had announced before I made it. "You can ask whether I want to host Christmas," I said. "You can't tell everyone I already offered." Mom glanced around the table. I was only trying to make a plan. Melissa spoke before I could. "Then ask her." She said it casually, almost kindly. That made it more powerful. There was no accusation in her voice, no demand that Mom admit to years of manipulation. It was simply the new rule stated by someone other than me. Mom looked at Melissa as if she had violated some private agreement. "I know my daughter," Melissa shrugged. "Then asking shouldn't be a problem." Beside me, Ashley lowered her eyes, but I saw the corner of her mouth move. Mom saw it too. "You think this is funny?" Ashley looked up. "No, you certainly seem comfortable with everyone treating me like I can't be trusted." The patio went quiet again. Evan shifted in his chair but did not answer for her. I appreciated that. For years, Mom had been able to pull Ashley back into place with some version of that accusation. "After everything I've done for you, you don't trust me anymore. You're taking someone else's side." It turned one disagreement into a judgment on the entire relationship. Ashley took a breath. "When you tell people I agreed to something I didn't agree to, they should check with me. I didn't say you agreed to anything. I'm talking about the pattern." Mom's face tightened. "There is no pattern. There's one ridiculous misunderstanding that your sister has turned into a family investigation." I could have pulled out my phone. Dad's text was still there. So was the cropped message Mom had sent Ashley. I could have ended the argument by showing everyone exactly what she had done. I didn't. We were past the point where Mom's guilt needed to be proven to a patio full of relatives. The evidence mattered when Ashley needed to understand how she had been misled and when Dad needed to acknowledge what he had known. It did not need to become entertainment at a barbecue. Ashley said, "It wasn't one misunderstanding." Mom looked at her. "You're really going to do this here?" "No. I'm telling you that if you say Lauren offered something, I'm going to ask Lauren. If you say Dad agreed to something, I'm going to ask Dad. If you say I want something, people should ask me. You've both become impossible." That one almost made me smile. "If impossible means I answer for myself," I said, "I can live with it." Mom pushed her chair back slightly. "Everything in this family has become so formal. Nobody can say anything anymore without being corrected." Dad had been silent until then. He stared at his plate long enough that I knew he was doing the old calculation. Saying nothing was safer. Agreeing with Mom would restore temporary peace. Challenging her would mean the argument followed him home. Then he looked up. "Diane." She turned toward him. "What? You told everyone Lauren offered the lake house for Christmas when she didn't." Mom stared at him. "I was trying to help Melissa plan." "Then you should have asked Lauren." I watched Dad carefully. There was no confidence in his expression. He looked uncomfortable and tired. But discomfort had stopped being enough to excuse silence. Mom's face hardened. "Apparently you've all decided I'm the problem." Nobody answered. For most of my life, that sentence would have triggered an immediate rescue. Dad would have reassured her. Ashley would have said, nobody meant that. I would have tried to distinguish the action from the person and somehow ended up comforting the person who had created the conflict. This time, nobody moved. Not because we hated her. Because there was nothing useful to say. After a few seconds, Melissa reached for the pitcher. Anyone want more iced tea? The conversation moved on. That was the moment I understood what Mom was really losing. It wasn't the lake house. That battle had ended the morning the truck turned around. It wasn't even credibility, in the dramatic sense. Nobody had announced that Diane Whitaker could never be believed again. She was losing the automatic pause that happened whenever she spoke. Before, if Mom said something about one of us, everyone treated it as information. Now they treated it as something to verify. Mom stayed another 40 minutes. She was polite, distant, and quieter than I had ever seen her at a family gathering. She helped Melissa collect paper plates, kissed my niece, and spoke to Dad in short sentences that made it obvious their drive home would not be pleasant. When she finally left, Dad hugged me and said he would call later. Mom hugged Ashley, kissed the baby again, and gave me a brief goodbye without adding any advice. I watched their SUV disappear down the street and waited for the rush of satisfaction I thought I had earned. It did not come. What I felt was relief. Ashley came to stand beside me near the driveway. That was awful. Which part? All of it. You survived. She looked sideways at me. You're enjoying this a little. Maybe 5%. That's still too much. I laughed. And for a moment we were simply sisters again. Not two women reconstructing years of conversations around our mother. Then Ashley became serious. I didn't know she told Melissa that. Neither did I. Do you think she really believed you'd host Christmas? I looked toward the patio where Nathan and Evan were helping carry dishes inside. I think she believed I probably would once everybody expected me to. Ashley nodded slowly. That was the mechanism we had finally learned to recognize. Mom did not always require certainty before she acted. She required momentum. If enough people began arranging themselves around the outcome she preferred, she trusted the rest of us to avoid the discomfort of stopping it. The wedding announcement had been the largest version. The moving truck had been the physical version. Christmas was only a smaller test to see whether the old machinery still worked. It didn't. 2 weeks after the barbecue, Ashley and Evan signed a lease on a 3-bedroom rental with a small fenced yard. It was slightly closer to Evan's office and about 20 minutes farther from Mom than the townhouse they were leaving. The house wasn't glamorous. The kitchen cabinets were dated, the upstairs carpet had seen better decades, and the backyard fence leaned just enough to make Evan start talking about whether renters were allowed to repair things themselves. Ashley loved it. She sent me photographs after they signed. The first showed the yard. The second showed the baby's future room. The third showed Ashley, standing in an empty kitchen with both arms raised over her head. Her message said, "We got it." Nothing else. No request for approval. No question about whether I thought the rent was too high. No attempt to make me responsible for whether they had made the correct decision. I called her that night. "You sound happy," I said. "I am. Terrified but happy. That's probably normal. Mom hates the location. That's also probably normal." Ashley laughed. "She thinks it's too far." "How far?" 23 minutes farther from her. Tragics. She offered to help with the deposit if we picked somewhere closer. I paused. "What did you say?" "No." The answer came so easily that I thought I had misheard her. "Just no?" I said thank you, but we already had the money. How did she take it? "How do you think?" I smiled. I'm trying to stop answering questions that belong to other people. Very funny. Ashley explained that she and Evan could afford the new place within the budget they had built. It meant cutting a few things and delaying a vacation, but they did not need financial rescue. Mom's offer would have made a more expensive rental near my parents easier. 6 months earlier, Ashley probably would have accepted immediately. This time, she had thought about what came after the check. "I don't think she'd literally hold it over us," Ashley said. I stayed quiet. She sighed. "Okay. She probably would. Your words. I know." That was part of her change, too. Ashley was learning that declining help was not the same thing as rejecting the person offering it. Mom had blurred those two ideas for years. If you declined her solution, you declined her love. If you rejected the favor, you rejected family. Ashley was beginning to separate them. The move happened at the beginning of July. I almost laughed when I saw the new moving truck pull up, because the sight of one still triggered a memory of the gate. This time everything was different. Ashley had booked the company herself. Evan had confirmed the address. The landlord knew they were arriving. The keys were theirs to receive. Mom helped because Ashley had asked her to. Dad assembled the crib in the baby's new room. Evan's mother brought sandwiches and drinks. Nathan and I came later with shelves Ashley had ordered. Nobody treated the day like a moral test of which relative loved Ashley most. Nobody counted who contributed more. At one point, Mom carried a box into the kitchen and said, "This place would have been much easier if it were closer." Ashley looked up from unpacking dishes. "Mom, what?" "I'm allowed an opinion." "You are." Mom waited, as if expecting more. Ashley went back to the box. That was it. Opinion acknowledged. Decision unchanged. I caught Evan watching the exchange from the doorway. He smiled slightly and returned to assembling a table. Mom stayed for several hours and behaved. When she left, she hugged Ashley, kissed the baby, and asked, "Would Wednesday be a good day for me to come by?" Ashley checked with Evan before answering. "Wednesday afternoon works." Mom nodded. The question itself would have been unremarkable to anyone outside our family. I noticed. My relationship with Dad settled into something cautious but real. He never asked for another lake house key. The subject came up indirectly once, when he was helping me check the exterior after a summer storm. We were standing in the mudroom when his eyes landed on the small hook where the emergency key had once hung at my parents' house. "You planning to give anyone another spare?" he asked. "Not right now." He nodded. "Fair." New argument. A few weeks later, he called me after Mom had gone to bed. "I know I keep saying this badly," he said, "but I'm sorry. I was sitting on the back porch in Greensboro while Nathan worked inside." "For which part?" Dad gave a tired laugh. "You really can't let anybody use the general version, can you?" "Not anymore." He went quiet. "For knowing she didn't have your yes," he said finally. "And deciding it wasn't my problem." I leaned back in the chair. That was the apology I had needed. Not "I'm sorry things got out of hand." Not "I'm sorry you were upset." Not "I'm sorry your mother took it too far." His action. His choice. "I accept that," I said. He exhaled. "That doesn't mean you get another key." "I know. And if Mom tells you I agreed to something, I ask you. Good?" There were no tears. No dramatic declaration that everything between us was repaired. Dad and I had always been close in a quiet way, which made his role in the lake house plan hurt more than I had admitted. Trust did not disappear completely, but it no longer arrived automatically. I could live with that. Mom and I were harder. I did not cut her off. I called on her birthday. Nathan and I had dinner at my parents' house. We attended family events. She saw me, hugged me, asked about work, complained that I never rested enough, and occasionally sent me recipes I had no intention of cooking. But I stopped paying the emotional fee she expected every time I disagreed. She tested the new boundaries in small ways. "Your father said you don't want us at the lake anymore." I asked Dad. He had said no such thing. "Lauren probably wants Christmas small after everything that happened." Ashley asked me. I had not said that either. Each time, Mom called the correction unnecessary. She had assumed, she had misunderstood, she had been trying to help. Eventually, fewer people bothered arguing about why she did it. They simply checked. That was what changed the family. One Sunday afternoon in late July, Ashley called while I was sitting on the lake house dock with Nathan. The baby was asleep, and Ashley looked tired but amused. Mom asked if she could pick the baby up Friday. Okay. I told her Evan's mom already has Friday. How'd that go? She asked why we needed Evan's mom when she was available. I waited. Ashley rolled her eyes. I told her we're rotating childcare depending on everybody's schedules. That sounds reasonable. She said it sounded like I was trying to make a point. Are you? No. I'm trying not to build our entire week around one person. Then there you go. Ashley was quiet. Then she said, I used to think needing Mom meant we were close. I looked out over the lake. And now? I think sometimes we were close. Sometimes I was dependent. Those aren't necessarily the same thing. That was more insight than I expected from my younger sister, so naturally I tried to ruin it. Write that down. You may never say anything that smart again. She told me to shut up. Our relationship was improving. Not because we had suddenly discovered that we had always loved each other perfectly. We hadn't. There were real resentments between us that Mom did not invent. Ashley had been the favored child in many ways. She had accepted help without always considering who absorbed the cost. I had used competence as armor, and sometimes treated her problems with more judgment than compassion. We were not rewriting that. We were removing the third voice from conversations that belonged to us. A few days after that call, Mom contacted me directly. Her voice was controlled but upset. Have you talked to Ashley today? No. She asked Evan's mother to keep the baby Friday. I know. So she's telling you things. She called me Sunday. Mom paused. Then you know what she's doing. What is she doing? She's still punishing me. Did she tell you that? I don't need her to spell everything out. The sentence hit me so cleanly that I almost laughed. There it was. The entire problem in 7 words. I don't need her to spell everything out. Mom continued. You know your sister. She's hurt, so now she's trying to prove she doesn't need me. Maybe. You know that's what this is. No, I know what Ashley told me. She said she and Evan are rotating childcare. Because she's angry. That might be part of it. Then talk to her. I went quiet. Mom heard it. Lauren, what exactly do you want me to say? Tell her I was trying to help. Tell her I never meant to hurt either of you. Tell her this has gone on long enough. I looked across the room at Nathan. He was reading on the couch and not paying attention to the conversation, which was exactly how I wanted it. No. Mom went silent. Lauren, please. No. I'm asking you for one favor. You're asking me to carry a message to Ashley about why she should interpret your actions differently. That is not what I said. It's what you're asking me to do. She listens to you now. The sentence bothered me. Then that's even more reason I shouldn't. Mom sounded genuinely confused. What? If Ashley trusts me more now, I'm not using that trust to tell her what relationship she should have with you. I'm her mother. I know. I've done everything for that girl. I know. And now she treats me like I need an appointment to see my own granddaughter. She asked you to call before visits. That's what I mean. I heard the pain in her voice, and for once I did not dismiss it as strategy. Maybe she was manipulating me. Maybe she was simply hurt. Most likely both could exist at once. I did not need to solve which one. Mom, if you want Ashley to understand you, call Ashley. She won't listen. She may not. So you're just going to let her shut me out? I'm not letting Ashley do anything. You know what I mean. Yes, and I'm still not doing it. Her voice broke slightly. You've turned everyone against me. The old version of me would have rushed to correct that. I would have told her nobody was against her. I would have reassured her that Ashley still loved her. Dad still loved her. I still loved her. I would have spent 10 minutes rebuilding the comfort she wanted before the call ended. Instead, I said, no. People are asking each other questions now. That's the same thing. It isn't. Before this, Ashley called me first. That was the most honest sentence she had said. Not before this, Ashley trusted me. Before this, Ashley called me first. Mom had built much of her identity around being the first call. The person who knew. The person who solved. The person who explained. Now, Ashley sometimes called Evan first. Sometimes me. Sometimes her mother-in-law. Sometimes nobody. That felt like rejection to Mom because independence had always threatened the role she valued most. I can't fix that for you, I said. You could if you wanted to. That was probably true. I could have called Ashley. I could have told her Mom sounded devastated. I could have encouraged her to soften the boundary. Ashley might have listened because our relationship was new enough that she was still taking my words seriously. That was exactly why I refused. For the first time in years, The power to speak for someone else was sitting within reach of me. I understood why Mom liked it. "No," I said. "If you have something to say to my sister, say it to her yourself." Mom hung up shortly afterward. She did not call me again for almost a week. When she finally did, she asked how work was. We talked for 15 minutes. No messages to carry. By August, Nathan and I finally took the honeymoon we had delayed after the wedding. 10 days away, no property drama, no family logistics, and no moving trucks anywhere near us. The distance helped more than I expected. For months, I had been so focused on correcting the family system that I had barely noticed how much of my first season of marriage had been shaped by it. One morning over breakfast, Nathan asked whether I wished I had confronted Mom publicly at the wedding. I thought about it. No. Not even a little? Maybe 3%. He smiled. If I had stopped the reception and exposed everything that night, I would have won the argument before I understood the problem. Nathan nodded. And the problem wasn't the house. No. The house had simply been large enough to force me to look. I had spent years believing my strength was that I did not need to explain myself. If someone misunderstood me, that was their problem. If Mom misrepresented something small, I dismissed it rather than waste energy correcting her. That worked until silence became useful to someone else. Mom filled the gaps. Sometimes with what she honestly believed. Sometimes with what made family life easier. Sometimes with what gave Ashley what she wanted. And once, at my wedding, with a plan she knew I had never approved. I still did not believe I owed everyone a defense of every decision. That lesson had not changed. What changed was simpler. I no longer allowed people to treat someone else's interpretation as my answer. When we returned from our honeymoon, the family was already planning Labor Day. Aunt Melissa was hosting dinner on Sunday. Dad was talking about grilling Monday. Ashley and Evan might come depending on the baby. We were all sitting at my parents' dining table when Mom began. "Lauren and Nathan will probably be at the lake for Labor Day, so..." She stopped. The room stayed quiet. Nobody corrected her. She looked at me. For a second, I saw the effort it took to change the sentence. "Actually," she said, "Lauren, what are you and Nathan doing for Labor Day?" It was such a small question that anyone outside our family would have missed it. I didn't. "We haven't decided yet." Mom nodded. "All right." And the conversation continued. No one interpreted my uncertainty. No one turned it into a commitment. No one planned around an answer I had not given. The lake house is still mine. I did not sell it to prove I had moved on. I did not eventually give it to Ashley to show that forgiveness had made me generous. Nathan and I still use it whenever we want quiet. Ashley, Evan, and my niece have visited several times since the move, because being welcome is not the same thing as being entitled. The original blue-tagged key is still in the small wooden tray beside my desk. I could throw it away. It no longer opens anything. The locks it belonged to were replaced months ago. I keep it anyway. Not as evidence against Mom. As evidence for myself. A key can be useless and still look like access. A statement can be technically true and still be arranged to create a lie. Help can be generous and still become control when the person receiving it is never allowed to say no. And silence can look like peace right up until someone starts using it as consent. I used to think the smartest person in a conflict was the one who did not waste time explaining herself. Now I think it depends on who is waiting to explain her for her. I still don't need everyone in my family to agree with me. I don't need Mom to approve of every boundary. I don't need Ashley to understand every choice I make. I don't even need Dad to become a man who suddenly loves confrontation. But if someone wants to know what I said, what I agreed to, what I offered, or what I want, there is one person they ask now. Me. Mom knows that too. She does not always like it. Neither does everyone else. But they ask. And for the first time in my family, when I say, "I haven't decided yet," nobody decides for me. You do not have to start a fight to protect a boundary, but you do have to make your answer clear. When someone speaks for you, check the facts, communicate directly, and do not let guilt turn silence into consent. Family help is healthy only when it respects ownership, choices, and the right to say no. You can forgive people without giving them back the same access they misused. Most importantly, let adults carry their own messages and consequences. If you value stories about family, boundaries, and hard-earned accountability, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next one.